Kokoro Natsume Soseki, Part 1, Sensei and I, Chapter 1. I always called that man Sensei. So here as well, I will simply write Sensei and will not disclose his real name. This is not so much out of a reserve that shrinks from the world, as because that feels more natural to me. Whenever I summon up the memory of him, I immediately want to say, Sensei. Even when I take up my pen, my feeling is the same. I have no mind at all to use some distant, formal initial. It was in Kamakura that I came to know Sensei. At that time, I was still a young student. A friend of mine, who had gone there for sea bathing during the summer vacation, sent me a postcard urging me to come without fail. So, I managed to scrape together a little money and decided to set out. I spent 2 or 3 days raising the funds, but before even 3 days had passed, after I arrived in Kamakura, the friend who had called me there received a sudden telegram ordering him home. The message said that his mother was ill, but he did not believe it. For some time, his parents in the provinces had been pressing upon him a marriage he did not welcome. By modern custom, he was still much too young to marry, and, above all, he himself disliked the match. So, instead of going home, as he naturally should have done during the summer holiday, he had deliberately avoided it and was amusing himself near Tokyo. He showed me the telegram and asked what he should do. I had no idea. Yet if his mother really was ill, then of course he ought to go back. And so, in the end, he did return home. I, who had come there with such effort, was left behind alone. There were still many days before school was to begin again. Being in a situation where I might either remain in Kamakura or go home, I resolved for the time being to stay on at the inn where we had been. My friend was the son of a wealthy man somewhere in China and had no trouble with money. But because of the nature of our school and because of our age, his standard of living was not so very different from mine. So, once I found myself alone, I did not bother to go searching for another, more suitable lodging. The inn stood in a rather remote quarter, even for Kamakura. To get at fashionable things like billiards or ice cream, one had to cross a long stretch of road. Even by rickshaw, it cost 20 sen. Yet private villas have been built here and there all about the place, and since it lay extremely close to the sea, it occupied a most convenient position for sea bathing. Every day, I went out to swim, passing between old, smoke-darkened thatched houses and descending to the shore. I would find the sand alive with men and women who had come to escape the heat. So many that one could hardly believe this neighborhood held such a population of city people. At times, Isi itself was so crowded with black heads that it looked like a public bath, though I did not know a single person among them. I, too, was wrapped in the midst of such lively scenes, and it pleased me to stretch myself out upon the sand, or let the waves strike my knees as I leapt about there on the shore. It was, in fact, amid this throng that I first found Sensei. At that time, there were 2 bathing house tea stalls on the beach. By a chance occasion, I had grown accustomed to going to one of them. Unlike those who owned large villas around Hassie and had private dressing places prepared for their own use, the summer visitors in this area absolutely needed something like these shared changing places. Here they drank tea, here they rested, and besides that, here they had their bathing clothes washed, here they cleansed their bodies sticky with salt, and here they left hats and umbrellas in safekeeping. Even I, who had no bathing suit, was afraid my belongings might be stolen, so each time I went into the sea, I made it my rule to cast off everything I had at that tea house. Chapter 2. When I saw Sensei at that bathing house tea house, he was just then taking off his kimono and preparing to enter the sea. I, on the contrary, had at that moment just come up from the water, letting the wind blow over my wet body. Between the two of us, many black heads were moving, obstructing the sight. Had there not been a special circumstance, I might in the end have failed to notice him at all. The beach was that crowded, and my own mind was that idle and unfixed. Yet in spite of this, I immediately picked him out because Sensei had with him a single Westerner. The striking whiteness of that Westerner's skin caught my attention the instant he entered the bathing house tea house. He was wearing a pure Japanese yukata, which he slipped off and flung onto the bench, then stood there with his arms folded, facing the sea. He had nothing on his body but a single loincloth like the one we wore. That was the first thing that struck me as strange. 2 days before, I had gone as far as Uegahama, and crouching on the sand, I had spent a long time watching Westerners as they went into the sea. The place where I sat down was on a little rise, and just beside it was the back entrance of a hotel. So while I remained there, staring ahead, quite a number of men came out to bathe in the salt water, but not one of them had his torso, arms, and thighs laid bare. The women, even more deliberately, tended to conceal their flesh. Most of them wore rubber caps upon their heads, and the colors of reddish-brown, dark blue, and indigo floated among the waves. Having just witnessed such a scene, my eyes found this Westerner standing before everyone with nothing but a loincloth, extraordinarily curious. Presently he glanced at his side and said a word or two to a Japanese man who was crouching there. That Japanese man was just picking up a hand towel that had fallen on the sand. The moment he took it up, he wrapped it around his head and began walking toward the sea. That man, precisely, was Sensei. Simply out of curiosity, I watched the two figures as they descended the beach, side by side. Then they stepped straight into the waves, passing through the crowd of bathers, making a great noise. Near the shallow shore they came to a place comparatively open and wide, and there the two of them began to swim. They went on toward the open sea until their heads looked small. Then they turned back and came again in a straight line to the beach. When they returned to the tea house, they did not even pour well water over themselves, but merely dried their bodies, put on their clothes, and quickly went off somewhere. After they had left, I remained as before, seated on the same bench, smoking a cigarette. At that time, as I sat there blankly, I thought about Sensei. I could not help feeling that I had seen his face somewhere before, yet I could not remember, however I tried, when or where I had met him. At that time, I was less carefree than suffering from boredom. And so, the next day as well, judging the hour when I might meet Sensei again, I purposely went out to the bathing house tea house. This time, the Westerner did not come. Sensei arrived alone, wearing a straw hat. He took off his glasses and placed them on the stand, then at once wrapped his head with a towel and went briskly down the beach. When, as on the day before, Sensei passed through the noisy bathers and swam out alone, I suddenly felt an urge to pursue him. I splashed through the shallow water up over my head until I came to a place of proper depth, and from there I struck out in crawl, making Sensei my mark. But unlike the day before, Sensei described a kind of arc and began returning toward the shore from a curious direction. And so, my purpose was never fulfilled. By the time I came out onto land, swinging my dripping hands, and entered the tea house, Sensei was already fully dressed and, passing me by, was just going out. Chapter 3. The next day as well, I went to the beach at the same hour and saw Sensei's face. The day after that, I repeated the same thing again, yet no chance arose for me to speak to him, nor did any occasion come for an exchange of greetings between us. Indeed, Sensei's manner was rather unsociable. At a fixed hour, he came with an air of detachment, and with the same detachment he went away again. No matter how lively the scene around him might be, he seemed to pay almost no attention to it. The Westerner, who had first come with him, was never seen again after that. Sensei was always alone. One day, when Sensei, as usual, came quickly up from the sea and was about to put on the yukata, he had left cast aside in the usual place. For some reason, it was covered with sand. To shake it off, he turned his back and gave the garment 2 or 3 snaps. At that moment, the glasses that had been lying beneath his clothes fell down through the gap between the floorboards. After fastening a soft sash over his white kasuri, Sensei seemed to notice that his glasses were gone, and suddenly began looking about for them. I at once thrust my head and hand beneath the bench and picked them up. Sensei said, "Thank you," and took them from my hand. The next day, I plunged into the sea after Sensei. Then I swam in the same direction as he did. When we were about 2 chu offshore, Sensei turned around and spoke to me. On the broad blue surface of the sea, there was no one floating nearby except the 2 of us, and the strong sunlight was shining on water and mountain as far as the eye could reach. I moved muscles filled with freedom and delight, and danced wildly in the sea. Sensei again suddenly ceased moving his hands and feet, and lay back upon the waves, floating face upward. I imitated him. The color of the blue sky cast itself upon my face with a fierce brilliance that made my eyes ache. Isn't it splendid? I cried in a loud voice. After a while, Sensei altered his posture as if rising up in the sea and said, "Shall we go back now?" Being of a comparatively robust constitution, I wanted to go on playing in the water a while longer. But when Sensei invited me, I answered at once, "Yes, let us go back," quite readily. And so, the two of us turned once more and made our way back along the same course to the shore. From this time on, I became intimate with Sensei, yet I still did not know where he was staying. Then, after an interval of 2 days, on the afternoon, I think, of the third day, when I met Sensei at the bathing house tea house, he suddenly turned to me and asked, "Do you mean to stay here a good while yet?" Being a thoughtless fellow, I had stored up in my head no preparation at all for answering such a question. So I replied, "I really do not know." But when I saw the smile spreading over Sensei's face, I suddenly felt acutely awkward. I could not help asking in return, "And you, Sensei?" This was the beginning of the word sensei as it came from my lips. That evening, I went to visit the place where Sensei was lodging. Though I call it a lodging, it was unlike an ordinary inn, rather a villa-like building standing within the spacious grounds of a temple. I also learned that the people living there were not Sensei's family. Because I kept calling him Sensei, Sensei, he gave a bitter little smile. I explained that it was simply a habit of mine when addressing someone older than myself. I tried asking him about the Westerner I had seen before. Sensei spoke of the man's odd ways and of the fact that he was no longer in Kamakura, and after telling me various things, said that, considering he had very little association even with Japanese people, it was strange that he had come to know such a foreigner. At last, I said to Sensei that I felt I must have seen him somewhere before, and yet, try as I might, I could not remember where. Being young, I half suspected that he too might have some similar feeling, and in my heart I had already begun to expect his reply. But after remaining silent for a little while, Sensei said, "I really do not recall having seen your face before. Are you not mistaking me for someone else?" And at that I felt, strangely enough, a kind of disappointment. Chapter 4. I returned to Tokyo. At the end of the month, Sensei had already left his summer retreat. Long before that, when I parted from him, I asked, "May I come to call on you from time to time, from now on?" Sensei answered simply, "Yes, do come." At that period, I believed that I had grown fairly intimate with him, and so I had expected somewhat more considerate words from him. For that reason, this insufficient reply slightly wounded my confidence. I was often made to feel disappointed by Sensei in such matters as this. At times, he seemed aware of it. At others, he seemed completely unaware. Though I repeated these small disappointments, I could not bring myself to drift away from him on that account. Rather, the contrary was true. Each time I was shaken by uncertainty. I wanted to press farther on. If only I went farther, I thought, then surely something I expected would one day appear fully before my eyes. I was young, and yet I did not think that in regard to every human being, young blood would work with such simple candor. Why it was that such feelings arose in me toward Sensei alone, I did not know. Only now, after Sensei's death, have I at last come to understand it. Sensei had not, from the beginning, disliked me. Those curt greetings he sometimes gave me, and those actions of his that seemed cold, were not expressions of displeasure meant to keep me at a distance. Poor, suffering Sensei was giving a warning to anyone who tried to draw near to him. Do not, for I am not worth coming near. Sensei, who did not respond to the affection of others, appears to have despised himself first before despising others. Naturally, I came back to Tokyo intending to visit Sensei. Since there were still 2 weeks remaining before classes began again, I thought I would go to see him once during that time. But as 2 or 3 days passed after my return, the mood I had known in Kamakura gradually faded, and on top of that, the air of the great city laid over it all, deeply dyed my heart with the strong stimulation that comes with revived memories. Each time I saw the face of a student out on the streets, I felt hope and tension toward the new school term. For a while, I forgot Sensei. After classes began, and about a month had passed, a kind of slackness came again into my heart. I found myself walking the streets with an unsatisfied look. I looked around my room as if searching for something I lacked. Then once more, Sensei's face rose before my mind. I wanted to see him again. The first time I visited his house, Sensei was out. The second time, I remember, was on the following Sunday. It was a fine day with a clear sky that seemed to sink into one's very body. That day as well, Sensei was out. When I was in Kamakura, I had heard from Sensei's own lips that he was usually at home almost all the time. I had even heard that he disliked going out, having come twice and failed twice to meet him. I remembered those words and felt, without reason, some vague dissatisfaction somewhere within me. I did not at once leave the entrance. Seeing the maid's face, I hesitated a little and stood there. The maid, who remembered having taken in my calling card before, left me waiting and went back inside again. Then a lady who appeared to be the mistress of the house came out in her place. She was a beautiful woman. From her, I was politely told where Sensei had gone. It seemed that every month, on that particular day, Sensei had the custom of going to place flowers before a certain Buddha in the cemetery at Soshigaya. He has only just left, perhaps 10 minutes ago, or not even that, the lady said, with a look of kind regret. I bowed and went out. After walking about one chotot toward the lively part of the town, I myself began to feel inclined, as part of my stroll, to go on to Zoshigaya. My curiosity, too, was stirred. whether I might meet Sensei there or might not. And so I turned at once upon my heel. Chapter 5. I entered the cemetery from the left side of the seabeds that lay before it and went on inward along the broad road, lined on both sides with maple trees. Then, from the tea house visible at the far end, a man who seemed to be Sensei suddenly came out. I went close enough for the rim of his glasses to catch the sunlight, and then, all at once, I called out in a loud voice, "Sensei!" Stopped short and looked at my face. How, he repeated the same words twice. That phrase was repeated with a strange tone in the stillness of the quiet noon. I suddenly found myself unable to answer at all. "You followed me here? How?" Sensei's manner, if anything, was composed. His voice, if anything, was low. Yet, in his expression, there was a kind of cloudiness that I could not clearly define. I told Sensei how it was that I had come there. "Did my wife tell you the name of the person whose grave I had gone to visit?" "No," she said. "Nothing of the sort." "Is that so?" "Yes." Of course she would not have said it. Not to you, meeting you for the first time. There was no need to say it. Sensei now appeared at last to be satisfied, but I myself did not understand his meaning at all. Sensei and I, intending to go out to the street, passed between the graves, beside tombs inscribed with such names as "The Grave of Elizabeth So-and-so," and "God's Servant Rogan." There stood gravestaves bearing words like "All living beings, without exception, possess Buddha nature." There was also one that read "Envoy Extraordinary" and "Minister Plenipotentiary so-and-so," before a small grave carved with the name Andor. I asked Sensei, "How is this meant to be read?" "Perhaps they intend it to be read as Andre," said Sensei with a faint smile. It seemed that Sensei did not, as I did, find either absurdity or irony in the varied races and various styles represented by these gravestones. At first, he listened in silence while I pointed out round tombstones and slender granite markers, eager to comment on them, one after another. But at last he said, "You have never yet thought seriously about the fact of death, have you?" I fell silent. Sensei, too, said no more after that. At the division between one part of the cemetery and another, a great ginkgo tree stood there as though hiding the sky. When we came beneath it, Sensei looked up at its lofty treetop and said, "A little later, it is beautiful. When this tree has turned completely yellow, the ground around here seems as though it will be buried under golden leaves." Sensei passed beneath this tree without fail once every month. In the distance, a man who was leveling the uneven ground to make a new cemetery rested on his hoe and looked at us. From there, we turned left and at once came out onto the road. Having no destination at all for where I should go next, I simply walked in the direction. Sensei walked less than usual. Even so, I did not feel particularly constrained, and so I strolled along with him. Are you going straight home now? I have nowhere in particular to stop by. Again, the two of us went down the slope toward the south in silence. Is your family grave there, Sensei? I began again. No. Then whose grave is there? Is it a relative's grave? No. Beyond this, Sensei answered. Nothing more. I, too, let the matter drop there and brought the subject to an end. Then, after we had walked about one cho, Sensei suddenly returned to it of his own accord. My friend's grave is there. You visit your friend's grave every month? Yes. That day, Sensei said nothing more than this. Chapter 6. After that, I came to visit Sensei from time to time. Whenever I went, he was at home, and as the number of times I met him increased, I found myself going more and more often to Sensei's door. Yet Sensei's manner toward me changed very little, whether at the time of our first greeting or after we had grown intimate. Sensei was always quiet. At times, he was so quiet that it was almost lonely. From the first, I had felt that there was about Sensei a certain strange remoteness, something difficult to approach, and yet, somewhere within me, there worked a strong feeling that I simply could not help but draw near to him. It may be that among many people, I alone felt this way toward Sensei. Yet, for me alone, this intuition was later borne out by fact itself. So even if I am told that I was merely young or laughed at as foolish, I still feel all the same that the instinct by which I foresaw it was something reliable and even something, a man capable of loving others, a man who could not help but love them, and yet a man who was unable to open his arms and embrace those who sought to enter the shelter of his heart. That was Sensei. As I have said, Sensei was always quiet. He was composed, and yet, from time to time, a strange shadow would pass across his face, like the shadow of a black bird falling across a window. It would appear and then vanish at once. The first time I noticed that shadow between Sensei's brows was in the cemetery at Zoshigaya, when I called out to him. Suddenly, in that strange instant, I felt the tide of my heart, which had been flowing smoothly until then, grow slightly dull. But it was no more than a momentary obstruction. Within less than 5 minutes, my heart recovered its usual elasticity, and I forgot that dark cloud shadow altogether. It was by chance that I was made to remember it again. One evening, when late autumn was almost over, the first time I noticed that shadow between Sensei's brows was in the cemetery at Zoshigaya when I called out to him. Suddenly, in that strange instant, I felt the tide of my heart, which had been flowing smoothly until then, grow slightly dull. But it was no more than a momentary obstruction. Within less than 5 minutes, my heart recovered its usual elasticity, and I forgot that dark cloud shadow altogether. It was by chance that I was made to remember it again, one evening when late autumn was almost over. While I was talking with Sensei, the great ginkgo tree, which he had once carefully pointed out to me, suddenly rose before my eyes. When I counted the days, I found that the day on which Sensei, as a monthly custom, went to visit the grave would come exactly 3 days later. That third day was an easy day for me when my classes ended at noon. So I said to Sensei, "Sensei, have the ginkgo leaves at Zoshigaya already fallen by now?" "Not so far that the branches would be left bare yet, I think." As he answered, Sensei kept his eyes upon my face, and for a little while he did not look away. I said at once, "When you go to visit the grave next time, may I accompany you? I should like to stroll about that place together with you, Sensei. I go there to visit a grave. I do not go there for a stroll. But if, while you are there, you should happen to take a stroll as well, that would be just as good, would it not?" Sensei made no reply. After a little while, he said, "What I do there is nothing but a genuine visit to the grave," and he seemed determined to the very end to keep grave visiting and strolling entirely apart. At that time, it struck me as strangely childish, whatever it was, whether an excuse for not wishing to go there with me or something else. I still felt inclined to press on. "Then, even if it is only grave visiting, please let me come with you. I too will visit the grave." In truth, the distinction between visiting a grave and taking a stroll seemed to me almost meaningless. Then Sensei's brows darkened slightly, and in his eyes, too, there appeared a strange light. It was something like a faint uneasiness, which could not be neatly called annoyance or aversion or fear. At once, I vividly remembered the moment at Zoshigaya when I had called out, "Sensei." The two expressions were exactly the same. Sensei said, "I have a certain reason, one which I cannot speak of to you, for not wishing to go there to visit the grave with another person. I have not yet taken even my own wife there." Chapter 7. I thought it strange, but I did not go in and out of Sensei's house with the intention of studying him. I simply let the matter pass as it was. Now that I look back on it, my attitude at that time was rather one of the things in my life that deserved to be honored. I believe it was precisely because of that I was able to have with Sensei a warm and human relationship. If my curiosity had worked upon Sensei's heart, even in the slightest degree, in an investigative way, then the thread of sympathy that bound the two of us together would, without mercy, have been snapped at that very moment. Young as I was, I had no awareness whatever of my own attitude. That may be why it was precious. But had I gone astray and taken a wrong turn behind it, what sort of result might have fallen upon our relationship? Even to imagine it makes me shudder. Sensei, even apart from that, was constantly afraid of being studied by a cold eye. I came to make it a rule to go to Sensei's house without fail twice or perhaps 3 times a month. One day, when my visits had become gradually more frequent, Sensei suddenly asked me, "Why is it that you come so often to the house of a person like me?" As for why, there is no such special meaning. But am I a nuisance? I do not say you are a nuisance. Certainly, there was nowhere in Sensei any sign of annoyance. I knew how extremely narrow the circle of Sensei's acquaintance was. I also knew that among his former classmates, there were at that time hardly more than 2 or 3 still living in Tokyo. There were occasions when students from Sensei's home province would happen to sit in the same room with us, but none of them, it seemed to me, felt toward Sensei the kind of closeness that I did. "I am a lonely man," Sensei said. "That is why I am glad when you come to see me. That is why I asked why you come so often. And why is that so?" When I asked him this, in return, Sensei made no answer. He merely looked at my face and said, "How old are you?" This exchange was extremely obscure to me. Yet, at that time, I did not press him to the bottom of it, and I went home. Even so, before 4 days had passed, I visited Sensei again. The moment Sensei came into the room, he began to laugh. "So, you have come again," he said. "Yes, I have come again," I answered, and laughed myself. If someone else had said such a thing to me, I think I would surely have felt offended. But when Sensei said it, the effect was the exact opposite. Not only was I not offended, I was, on the contrary, pleased. "I am a lonely man," Sensei said again that evening, repeating the words he had used before. "I am a lonely man, but perhaps you also are a lonely man, are you not? Even if I am lonely, I am old, and so I can remain still. But you, being young, cannot do that. You want to move as much as you are able to move. You want to move and strike against something. I am not lonely at all. There is nothing more lonely than youth. If that is so, then why do you come to my house so often?" Here again, the same words as before were repeated from Sensei's lips. "Even after meeting me, you probably still feel somewhere in yourself a sense of loneliness, for I do not have the power to pull that loneliness out by the root. For your sake, before long, you will have to turn in some other direction and stretch out your hands there. Before long, your feet will no longer carry you toward my house." Saying this, Sensei smiled, a lonely smile. Chapter 8. Fortunately, Sensei's prophecy did not come true. At that time, being still inexperienced, I was unable to understand even the plain meaning contained in that prophecy. I continued, just as before, to go and see Sensei. Before long, almost without noticing how, I had come to eat meals at Sensei's table, and as a natural consequence, I had to speak with his wife as well. As an ordinary human being, I was not cold toward women, Yet, judging from the circumstances through which my young life had so far passed, I had scarcely ever formed what could truly be called an acquaintance with any woman. Whether that was the cause or not, I cannot say, but my interest worked mainly toward women whom I did not know, women I merely happened to encounter in the streets. When I had first met Sensei's wife at the entrance, I had been impressed by her beauty, and each time I saw her afterward, that same impression never failed to return. Yet beyond that, I felt that I had nothing in particular to say about her. Perhaps it would be fairer to interpret this not as meaning that she had no distinct character, but rather that no opportunity ever came for her to reveal it. Still, I always regarded her as though she were a part attached to Sensei, and she too, it seemed, treated me kindly simply because I was a student who came to see her husband, so that if Sensei, who stood between us, were removed, the two of us would at once have fallen apart. And for that reason, when I think back to Sensei's wife, as I first knew her, no impression remains, except that she was beautiful. One time, at Sensei's house, I was given sake to drink. On that occasion, his wife came out and sat beside us, pouring for me. Sensei looked more cheerful than usual. Turning to his wife, he said, "You should have a cup too," and held out to her the cup he himself had emptied. She began to decline, saying, but then, with an air of reluctance, accepted it. Drawing together her beautiful brows, she took to her lips the cup into which I had poured about half a serving for her. Then the following conversation began. Between Sensei and his wife, what a rare thing! You hardly ever tell me to drink. That is because you dislike it. But once in a while, it does you good to drink. It makes one feel pleasant. It does not at all. It only makes me suffer. But you seem very cheerful when you have had a little sake. At times, it makes me very cheerful, but not always. And how is it tonight? Tonight, I feel quite good. Then you ought to have a little every night. That would not do. Please do drink. It would be better, because then you would not feel so lonely. Sensei's household consisted only of husband and wife, and a maid. Whenever I went there, it was generally quiet. Never once did I hear such a thing as loud laughter. At times, it felt to me as though the only people in the house were Sensei and I. It would be nice if we had a child, wouldn't it? Sensei's wife said, turning toward me. Yes, indeed, I answered, but no sympathy arose in my heart. Having never had a child, at that time, I thought of children merely as noisy things. Shall I get one for you, then? Sensei said. But an adopted child, don't you think so? His wife said again, turning toward me. No child will ever be born to us, said Sensei. His wife said nothing. Why is that? I asked in her place. It is heaven's punishment, said Sensei, and laughed aloud. Chapter 9. So far as I knew, Sensei and his wife were a pair of happily matched spouses. Since I had never lived as a member of any household, I could not, of course, understand the deeper currents between them. Yet when Sensei was sitting with me in the guest room, he would sometimes, for one reason or another, call his wife instead of calling the maid. His wife's name was Shizu. Sensei would always turn toward the sliding doors and say, Shizu. The way he called her sounded gentle to me, and the manner in which she answered and came out was extremely unaffected, especially on those occasions when I was invited to a meal and she appeared at our place. This relation between them seemed to be drawn all the more clearly before my eyes. From time to time, Sensei took his wife to concerts or to the theater, and as I remember, there were also more than 2 or 3 occasions when the two of them went traveling together for less than a week. I still have a picture postcard they sent me from Hakone. And when they went to Nikko, I received a letter with a single red autumn leaf enclosed inside. Such, in general, was the relation between Sensei and his wife as it appeared to my eyes at that time. Yet, among all this, there was one single exception. One day, when I came as usual to Sensei's entrance and was about to ask to be shown in, I heard voices speaking from the guest room. When I listened carefully, I realized it was not ordinary conversation. It sounded very much like a quarrel. In Sensei's house, the guest room came immediately after the entrance. So, while standing before the lattice, I could make out at least the tone of the dispute. And from the man's voice, which rose from time to time, I understood that one of them was Sensei. The other voice was lower than his, so I could not tell clearly who it was, yet it somehow seemed to be his wife. It even sounded as though she were crying. I hesitated there at the entrance, wondering what I ought to do, but at once made up my mind and returned. Just as I was to my lodging, a strangely anxious feeling came over me. Even when I tried to read a book, I had lost the ability to take in what was before my eyes. After about an hour, Sensei came beneath my window and called my name. Startled, I opened the window. Sensei invited me from below, saying we should go for a walk. When I took out the watch, still wrapped in my sash, and looked at it, it was already past 8 o'clock. I had returned home without changing and was still wearing my hakama. In that same state, I went out at once. That night, I drank beer together with Sensei. By nature, Sensei was a man of little capacity for drink. He was not the sort of man who, after drinking up to a certain point and failing to become merry, could venture to go on drinking until he did become merry. Tonight it is no use, Sensei said with a bitter smile. Can you not become cheerful? All the while, the matter of a little earlier remained caught within me. Like a fishbone stuck in the throat, it tormented me. I wavered strangely, now thinking I might speak openly of it, then deciding it would be better not to. This unrest made my whole manner oddly fidgety. You are not yourself tonight, Sensei said first. The truth is, I too feel a little strange. Can you tell? I could not answer a single thing. The truth is, a little while ago, I had a small quarrel with my wife. and it has excited my wretched nerves over something trivial. Sensei said again, why, the word quarrel would not come to my lips. My wife misunderstands me, and even when I tell her it is a misunderstanding, she will not accept it. At last I lost my temper. In what way does she misunderstand you, Sensei? Did not try to answer this question of mine. If I were indeed the kind of man my wife imagines me to be, then even I would not be suffering like this. How greatly Sensei suffered. That, too, was something beyond the reach of my imagination. Chapter 10. As we walked back, the silence between us continued, for one cho, then for two. After that, Sensei suddenly began to speak. I did a bad thing. I went out in anger, so my wife must be terribly worried. When one thinks of it, women are pitiable creatures. My wife, for example, has absolutely no one to rely on but me. Sensei's words broke off there for a moment, but he showed no sign of expecting any reply from me, and at once went on. Though, when I put it that way, the husband sounds absurdly self-assured. Tell me, how do I seem in your eyes? Do I look like a strong man or a weak one? You seem somewhere in between, I answered. This answer appeared to take Sensei a little by surprise. He closed his mouth again and went on walking in silence. The proper way to return to Sensei's house was to pass quite close by my lodging. When we came that far, I felt somehow that it would be unkind to leave Sensei at the corner and part from him there. Shall I come with you as far as your door, since it is on the way? I said. Sensei at once checked me with his hand. It is late now, so go home at once. I too will hurry home, for my wife's sake. Those words, which Sensei added at the end, for my wife's sake, warmed my heart. Strangely, at that moment, because of those words, I was able, when I got home, to sleep in peace. And for a long time afterward, I did not forget that phrase, for my wife's sake. Even from this, I understood that the disturbance which had arisen between Sensei and his wife could not have been a very serious one. And because I continued, after that, to come and go at the house constantly, I was also able to infer that such things were not occurrences that happened often. Indeed, at one time, Sensei even let slip to me a reflection like this. In all the world, I know only one woman. Apart from my wife, other women hardly appeal to me as women at all. And on her side as well, she thinks of me as the only man in all the world. From that point of view, we ought to be the happiest pair of human beings ever born. Now I have forgotten the course of events, before and after, so I cannot say clearly for what reason Sensei made such a confession to me, and yet I still remember the seriousness of Sensei's manner and the subdued tone in which he spoke. At that time, the only words that rang oddly in my ears were the final ones. We ought to be the happiest pair of human beings ever born. Why did Sensei not simply say that they were happy people, but instead say that they ought to be. That alone seemed strange to me. Especially strange was the force with which Sensei laid stress on those words. Was Sensei, in truth, happy? Or though he ought to have been happy, was he perhaps not so happy after all? I could not help questioning it in my heart, yet that doubt too was buried somewhere for the time being. Before long, there came an occasion when I visited during Sensei's absence and found myself speaking face to face with his wife alone. On that day, Sensei had gone out to Shinbashi to see off a friend who was to board a steamship sailing from Yokohama for a foreign country. In those days, it was the custom for people embarking at Yokohama to leave Shinbashi on the 8:30 train in the morning. I had some need to have Sensei speak to me about a certain book, and so, as had been arranged, with his consent beforehand, I called at 9 o'clock. Sensei's trip to Shinbashi was something that had come up suddenly that day as a matter of courtesy toward the friend who had gone out of his way to come the previous day and say farewell. Sensei had said before leaving that he would return at once, and that even if he were out, I was to wait for him there. So I went up to the sitting room, and while I waited for Sensei, I talked with his wife. Chapter 11. At that time, I was already a university student. Compared with the days when I had first begun to visit Sensei's house, I felt myself to be much more grown. And by then, I had also become considerably familiar with his wife. I felt no constraint in her presence. Sitting face to face, we talked about many things, but it was all ordinary conversation, without any special character, and now I have forgotten it entirely. Among it, however, there was one thing alone that remained in my ears. But before I speak of it, there is something I should first explain. Sensei had graduated from the university. I had known that from the beginning. But the fact that Sensei did nothing and simply lived at leisure, I only came to understand some time after I had returned to Tokyo. At that time, I wondered how he could live without working. Sensei was a man whose name was not known to the world at all. Therefore, with regard to his learning and his thought, there could hardly be anyone besides myself who stood in close relation to him to pay them due respect. And I always said it was a pity. Sensei, however, did no more than answer, "A man like me must not go out into the world and speak, and would not engage with what I said." To me, that answer sounded so excessively modest that it seemed almost like a cold judgment upon the world itself. In fact, Sensei would at times seize upon this or that former classmate of his, who had by then become well known, and pass upon him a criticism remarkably blunt. So I openly pointed out the contradiction and tried to argue the matter. My spirit in doing so was not so much one of rebellion as regret that the world could remain so unconcerned without knowing Sensei. At such times, Sensei would say in a subdued tone, "In any case, I am a man without the qualification to act upon the world, so it cannot be helped." On Sensei's face, there would then be deeply engraved a certain expression, whether it was disappointment or discontent or sorrow. I could not tell, but whatever it was so powerful that I had not the courage to add another word. And there the matter ended. While I was talking with his wife, the subject naturally passed from Sensei to this. Why is it that Sensei lives like that, simply thinking and studying at home, and does not go out into the world and do some work? He is no good at that sort of thing. He dislikes it. Then perhaps he has come to see it as something trivial? As to seeing through it, or not seeing through it, well, I am only a woman, so I do not know. But surely that is not what it means. He probably does want to do something, and yet he cannot do it. That is why I feel sorry for him. But as far as health goes, Sensei does not seem to have anything wrong with him in particular. He is perfectly strong. He has no chronic illness at all. Then why is it that he cannot be active? That is what I do not understand. You see, if I understood that much, I myself would not be worrying like this. It is because I do not understand that I feel so terribly sorry. There was a very deep sympathy in his wife's tone, and yet at the corners of her mouth there was still a faint smile. To outward appearance, I was rather the more serious of the two. I kept silent, wearing a grave expression. Then his wife, as if suddenly remembering something, opened her mouth again. Part 3. When he was young, he was not that sort of man at all. When he was young, he was completely different, and then he changed altogether. When you say when he was young, what period do you mean? I asked. In his student days. You knew Sensei from his student days? At once, his wife grew faintly red in the face. Chapter 12. Sensei's wife was a woman of Tokyo. I had known that already, having once heard it, both from Sensei and from his wife herself. She said, "To tell the truth, I am really half and half." Her father, if I remember rightly, was from Totori, or somewhere thereabouts, while her mother had been born in Ichigaya, back in the days when it was still called Edo. So she said it half in jest. Sensei, on the other hand, was entirely from a different quarter, a man of Niigata Prefecture. Therefore, if Sensei's wife had known him in his student days, it was plain that it could not be through any connection of their native places. But his wife, with her face slightly flushed, seemed unwilling to speak any farther than that. So I, too, did not question her deeply. From the time I first came to know Sensei until the time of his death, I touched, in a great many matters, upon his thoughts and emotions. Yet concerning the circumstances of his marriage, I was able to learn almost nothing. At times, I even interpreted that charitably. Sensei was an older man, And so I supposed he was deliberately refraining from telling a young fellow like me those recollections that had a touch of tenderness and romance. At other times, I took it badly, not only in Sensei's case, but in his wife's as well. I thought that, compared with me, the two of them had grown to maturity within the conventions of an earlier age, and therefore, when it came to a matter so tinged with love, they lacked the courage to open themselves frankly. Of course, both were no more than conjectures, and beneath either conjecture there lay the assumption that some brilliant romance existed in the background of their marriage. My assumption was not in fact mistaken. And yet I had imagined only one half of love. Behind a beautiful love Sensei carried a dreadful tragedy. And how miserable that tragedy was, for Sensei himself was something his wife did not know at all. Even now, she does not know it. Sensei died concealing it from her. Before he destroyed his wife's happiness, he first destroyed his own life. I shall say nothing here now about that tragedy. As for the love between those two, which might even be said to have been born through that tragedy, it was just as I have already said. Neither of them told me almost anything. His wife, because of modesty; Sensei, because of reasons still deeper than that. There is only one thing that remains in my memory. One spring, in cherry blossom time, I went with Sensei to Ueno, and there we saw a beautiful young couple. They walked beneath the blossoms, leaning close to each other, with an air of great intimacy. Because the place was what it was, there were many people there whose eyes were turned not toward the flowers, but toward the two of them. "They look like a newly married pair," said Sensei. "They seem to be very happy together." I answered. Sensei did not so much as smile bitterly. He turned his steps in a direction that would put the man and woman out of his line of sight. Then he asked me this: "Have you ever been in love?" I answered that I had not. "Do you not wish to fall in love?" I did not answer. It cannot be that you do not wish to. Yes, you looked at that man and woman just now and judged them coldly. In that cold judgment, there must have been mingled the voice of your displeasure because you long for love and yet have found no one to receive it. Did it sound like that to you? A man who has tasted the fulfillment of love speaks in a warmer voice. But, my young friend, love is a sin. Do you understand that? I was suddenly startled. I made no reply at all. Chapter 13. We were in the midst of a crowd. All the people in that crowd looked happy. Until we had passed through it and come into the woods, where neither flowers nor people could be seen, there had been no chance to speak again of the same matter. "Is love a sin?" I asked suddenly then. "It is a sin." "Certainly," replied Sensei, and the force in his tone was as strong as before. "Why is it?" "You will understand why before long." "No, not before long. You should already understand it. Has not your heart long since already begun to move with love? I examined, for form's sake, the inside of my own breast, but there, to my surprise, I found it empty. There was nothing there that I could point to. There is not a single definite object in my heart. I do not believe I am hiding anything from you, Sensei. It is because there is no object that it moves. If there were one, you think you would be able to come to rest, and so you long to move. At present, I am not moving to such a degree, and yet, because of dissatisfaction, you have moved toward me, have you not? That may be so, but that is different from love. It is a stairway leading up to love. In the order by which one comes to embrace the opposite sex, you have first moved toward me, a man of your own sex. It seems to me that the two things are entirely different in nature. No, they are the same. As a man, I am one who, no matter what I do, cannot give you satisfaction. And then, because of a certain special circumstance, I am all the more unable to give you that satisfaction. I truly feel sorry for you, that you should move away from me towards somewhere else cannot be helped. Indeed, I rather hope that you will. But a strange sadness came over me. If you think that I am going to drift away from you, Sensei, then it cannot be helped. But such a feeling has not yet arisen in me. Sensei paid no attention to my words, but one must be careful. Love is a sin. In my case, though you can gain no satisfaction, there is, instead, no danger. Tell me, do you know the feeling of being bound by long black hair? By imagination, I knew it, but as a fact, I did not know it. In any case, the meaning of the sin of which Sensei spoke remained dim and hard to grasp, and besides, I became a little displeased. Sensei, please tell me more plainly what you mean by calling it a sin. If not, then let us stop this discussion here until I myself can understand clearly what the meaning of sin is. I have done wrong. I thought I was speaking the truth to you, but in reality, I was only tormenting you. I have done wrong. Sensei and I walked on at a quiet pace from behind the museum in the direction of Ugusudani. Through the gaps in the fence, a part of a wide garden, thick with dwarf bamboo, appeared deep and secluded. Do you know why I go every month to visit the grave of my friend who lies buried in the cemetery at Soshigaya? This question of Sensei's was wholly sudden, and yet Sensei knew very well that I could not answer it. For a while, I made no reply. Then Sensei, as though noticing this for the first time, said, I have said another wrong thing. Thinking it wrong to torment you, I try to explain, and then that explanation itself results in tormenting you again. There is nothing to be done. Let us end this matter here. At any rate, love is a sin. Very well. And at the same time, it is a sacred thing. Sensei's words became even harder for me to understand. But after that, he said nothing more about love. Chapter 14. Young as I was apt at the slightest turn to become single-minded. At least, that is how I seem to have appeared in Sensei's eyes. To me, Sensei's conversation was more useful than the lectures at school. Sensei's thought was more precious to me than the opinions of my professors. To put it plainly, the silent Sensei, who kept to himself and spoke little, seemed greater to me than all those eminent men who stood upon the platform and instructed me. "You must not get too carried away," said Sensei. "When I say so, I say it as the result of calm reflection," I answered. And at that moment, I had complete confidence in myself. Sensei, however, did not accept that confidence. "You are delirious with fever. When the fever cools, you will grow sick of it. To be thought of so highly by the man you are now causes me pain. But when I imagine the change that is bound to come over you hereafter, it causes me still greater pain. Do you think so lightly of me? Do you distrust me to that degree? I feel sorry for you." "You mean you feel sorry for me, and yet you do not trust me?" Sensei turned with an air of vexation toward the garden. In that garden, not one of the camellia blossoms could now be seen. Those flowers, which until recently had been dropping there, their heavy, strong, red color, spot after spot. Sensei had a habit of gazing often at those camellia blossoms from the sitting room. When I say I do not trust, I do not mean that I distrust you in particular. I do not trust human beings as a whole. At that moment, from beyond the hedge, there came a cry that sounded like a goldfish seller's voice. Other than that, nothing at all could be heard. The lane, turning inward, a full 2 cho from the main road, was unexpectedly quiet. Inside the house, all was silent as usual. I knew that Sensei's wife was in the next room. I also knew that the sound of my voice was reaching her ears as she sat there in silence, doing needlework or something of that sort. Yet I had forgotten that completely. "Then do you not trust your wife either?" I asked Sensei. A slight uneasiness came over his face, and he avoided answering me directly. "I do not trust even myself. That is to say, because I cannot trust my own self, I have come to be unable to trust other people. There is nothing for it but to curse myself. If one thinks so deeply about it, then surely no one can have anything certain? No, it is not something I thought. It is something I did. And after doing it, I was horrified. And then I became terribly afraid. I wanted to go on a little farther yet, along the same path. Just then, from behind the sliding door, I heard his wife's voice, twice saying, You. At the second call, Sensei answered, "What is it?" His wife said, "Just a moment," and called Sensei into the next room. What matter had arisen between them, I could not tell. Before I had even the leisure to imagine it, Sensei came back into the sitting room. At any rate, you must not trust me too much. You will regret it one day. And then, in repayment for having been deceived, you will come to take a cruel revenge. What do you mean by that? The memory that once you knelt before a man will next make you wish to place your foot upon his head. I wish to reject the respect of the present in order not to suffer the insult of the future. Rather than endure the future self of mine, more lonely than I am now, I would rather endure the lonely self I am at present. We, who are born into this modern age, filled with freedom, independence, and the self, must all, as its sacrifice, taste this loneliness. Before a sensei who held such resolve, I knew not what words I ought to speak. Chapter 15. After that, whenever I looked at his wife's face, it troubled me. Did Sensei always take this same attitude, even toward her? And if so, was she satisfied with it? There was no way to decide from her manner whether she was satisfied or dissatisfied, for I had not so many opportunities to come into such close contact with her. And each time she met me, she was perfectly natural. And lastly, unless Sensei himself was present, his wife and I hardly ever found ourselves face to face. Yet my doubts went even farther still. From where did this resolution of Sensei's toward mankind arise? Was it merely the result of coldly reflecting upon himself, or of observing modern life? Sensei was a man who sat and thought. Would such an attitude come forth naturally, simply from sitting and thinking about the world? If only one possessed a mind like his. I could not think, that was all. Sensei's resolve seemed like a living resolve. It was unlike the outline of a stone house burned by fire and then left wholly cooled. The sensei who appeared before my eyes was certainly a thinker, and yet, behind the doctrine that thinker had built up, there seemed to be woven some powerful fact, not a fact belonging to others, cut off from himself, but a fact he himself had tasted sharply, a fact intense enough to make his blood grow hot or his pulse stand still. Such a fact seemed to lie folded within it. This was not something I was merely guessing in my own breast. Sensei himself had already confessed as much. Only that confession was like a mountain peak of cloud. It spread above my head, something terrible whose true form I could not know, and why it was terrible I myself did not understand. The confession was vague and dim, and yet it unmistakably made my nerves tremble. In my mind, I tried assuming that at the root of this view of life which Sensei held, there lay some violent affair of love. Needless to say, one that had taken place between Sensei and his wife. If I considered it in the light of Sensei's having once said that love is a sin, that, too, seemed to offer some clue. Yet Sensei had told me plainly that he loved his wife as she was now. If that were so, then from the love between those two, there ought not to have come forth such a resolve, one that bordered so nearly upon world weariness. Sensei's words, "The memory that once you knelt before a person will next make you wish to place your foot upon that person's head," seemed rather to be something that should be applied to this or that person in the modern world at large, and not something that truly fit the relation between Sensei and his wife. That grave at Zoshigaya, the grave of someone I did not know, also stirred from time to time in my memory. I knew that it was a grave deeply connected with Sensei. Unable, though I was gradually drawing nearer to Sensei's life, to come truly near him, I received that grave into my own mind as well as one fragment of the life that existed within his mind. And yet, for me, that grave was something completely dead. It did not become a key to open the door of life between us. Rather, it seemed like some evil thing standing between us, obstructing the free passage from one to the other. While matters stood thus, the time came again when I had to speak face to face with his wife. It was then the chilly season in late autumn, when the days were drawing in, restless and hurried, and anyone would naturally take notice of the cold. In the neighborhood around Sensei's house, there had been 3 or 4 cases, one after another, of theft. Each theft had taken place early in the evening. There were hardly any houses from which anything of great value had been taken, but wherever a thief had entered, something or other was always stolen. His wife felt uneasy about it. Then, on top of that, there arose a circumstance by which Sensei had to leave the house one evening. A friend from Sensei's home province, who was employed at a hospital in the country, had come up to Tokyo, and so Sensei, together with 2 or 3 others, found himself obliged to treat that friend to a meal at some place. Sensei explained the matter and asked me to stay behind and watch the house until he returned. I accepted at once. Chapter 16. When I arrived, it was still that hour of dusk when the lamps might or might not yet be lit, but Sensei, punctual as ever, was already out. He said it would never do to be late, and so he left only a little while ago, said his wife as she led me into Sensei's study. In the study, besides a Western-style desk and chair, there were many books, their beautiful leather backs standing in rows and shining through the glass in the light of the electric lamp. His wife seated me upon a round cushion spread before the brazier, and saying, "Please read any book you find there," for a little while left the room. I felt awkward, as though I were merely a guest waiting for the master to come home. I remained formal and stiff, smoking a cigarette. From the dining room, I could hear his wife's voice speaking of something to the maid. The study stood at the end of the veranda, off the dining room, around the corner, so that, by the way, the house was built, it possessed a quietness far more remote even than the drawing room. After a while, his wife's voice ceased, and then everything became still. I sat motionless, with the feeling of waiting in ambush for a burglar, keeping my attention alert somewhere all the while. About 30 minutes later, his wife again showed her face at the entrance to the study. "Oh," she said, turning her eyes on me with a light look of surprise. And then she seemed amused to see me sitting there so solemnly, like a caller received on formal terms. "That must be rather uncomfortable for you." No, it is not uncomfortable. But surely it must be dull." "No, since I am keyed up, expecting a burglar to come, it is not dull either." Holding a teacup of black tea in her hand, his wife stood there, smiling. "This is too much of a corner, isn't it, for standing guard?" I said. "Then, if you will excuse me, please come out a little more toward the middle of the house. I thought you might be bored, so I made some tea and brought it. If the dining room will do, I shall serve it there." I followed his wife out of the study. In the dining room, a kettle was singing on a beautiful long hibachi. There I was treated to tea and sweets. His wife did not touch her own cup, saying it would not do for her to lie awake later. Does Sensei go out to gatherings like this from time to time, after all? No, hardly ever. Lately, he seems to be growing more and more averse to seeing people's faces. There was nothing in her manner as she said this to suggest that she found it especially troublesome. And so I became a little bold. "Then, are you the one exception, madam?" "No, I too am one of the people he dislikes." "That is not true," I said. "You say so only because you know very well yourself that it is not true." "Why? If you ask me, it is because he came to love you that he came to dislike the world. You are a student after all, and very clever at using empty logic. Could not one just as well say, by the same logic, that because he came to dislike the world, he ended by disliking even me? Both can no doubt be said, but in this case, I am the one who is right. I do not care for arguments. Men do so love to argue, do they not? And with such enjoyment. I often wonder how they can go on, never tiring, exchanging cup after cup when the cups are empty. His wife's words stung a little, and yet, to the ear, they were by no means violent. She was not modern enough to take pride in making the other person recognize that she had a mind. Rather, she seemed to treasure a heart that lay deeper down than that. Chapter 17. I still had more that I wished to say after that, yet I held back because I did not want his wife to take me for the sort of man who idly provokes arguments. His wife, so as not to leave me sitting silent, peering into the bottom of the teacup I had emptied, asked, "Shall I pour you another cup?" I at once handed my cup to her. "How many? 1, 2?" Holding up a curious little piece of lump sugar, his wife looked at my face and asked how many pieces I wanted put into the cup. Her manner was not exactly one that sought to ingratiate itself with me, yet it was full of a charm that seemed deliberately meant to soften the sharpness of what she had said. A little while before, I drank my tea in silence, and even after I had finished, I remained silent. "You have become very quiet indeed," said his wife. "If I say anything, I feel as though I may be scolded again for setting up an argument," I answered. "Surely not," said his wife again. That became the thread by which the two of us began to talk once more. And again, we made Sensei, who was of common interest to us both, our subject. "Madam, would you allow me to say a little more in continuation of what we were just speaking of? It may sound to you like empty logic, but I am not speaking so lightly." "Then say it. If you were suddenly to disappear now, would Sensei be able to go on living as he does at present?" "How could I know such a thing? There is no help for it except to ask Sensei himself. It is not a question to bring to me. Madam, I am serious, so you must not evade me. You must answer honestly." "I am being honest, and honestly, I do not know." "Then, how deeply do you love Sensei? This is a question that should be asked of you rather than of Sensei. So I ask you." "There is no need to ask such a thing so squarely." "Do you mean to say that there is no need to ask it so solemnly because it is already obvious? If one so faithful to Sensei as you were suddenly gone, what would become of him? Sensei, to whom no side of this world seems very pleasing. If you were suddenly gone, what would become of him afterward? Not from Sensei's point of view, from yours. From your point of view, would Sensei become happy or unhappy? Why, from my point of view, it is clear enough, though Sensei himself may not think so. If he were parted from me, Sensei would only become unhappy. Perhaps he might not even be able to go on living. It sounds conceited to say so, but I believe that at present I am making Sensei as happy as it is possible for one human being to make another. I go so far as to think that no one else in all the world could make Sensei as happy as I do. That is why I am able to remain as calm as this." "I should think that such confidence must surely reflect itself clearly in Sensei's heart." "So you still mean to say that you are disliked by Sensei?" "I do not think that I am disliked. There is no reason why I should be. But Sensei dislikes the world, does he not? Or rather, these days, he seems to have come to dislike human beings. And so, as one of those human beings, how could I expect to be loved?" At last, I was able to understand what his wife meant when she said that she too was among those whom Sensei disliked. Chapter 18. I was impressed by his wife's understanding. There was also something in her manner, not quite like that of an old-fashioned Japanese woman, which gave a certain stimulus to my attention. And yet, she scarcely ever used those so-called new expressions that had only just begun to come into fashion at that time. I was a heedless young man who had never had any deep experience of association with women. As a man, through the instinct, I felt toward the opposite sex. I was always dreaming of woman as an object of longing, yet I dreamed of her only vaguely, with a feeling like gazing at beloved spring clouds. And so, when I actually found myself before a real woman, my feelings would sometimes suddenly change. Instead of being drawn toward the woman who appeared before me, I would sometimes, at the very moment, feel rather a strange force towards Sensei's wife. Nothing of that sort arose in me at all, nor did there come over me any strong sense of that inequality of thought which ordinarily lies between man and woman. I forgot that she was a woman. I looked upon her only as a sincere critic of Sensei and one who sympathized with him. Madam, when I asked you before why Sensei did not act more actively in the world, you said something, did you not? You said he had not always been as he is now? Yes, I did. In truth, he was not like this before. What was he like? He was the kind of man you would hope him to be, and I too would hope him to be. A dependable man. And how was it that he changed so suddenly? Not suddenly. Little by little he became as he is. And you were with Sensei all through that time, were you not? Of course I was. We are husband and wife. Then you ought to know very well what the cause was that made Sensei change in that way. That is exactly what makes it so hard. When you say that to me, it is truly painful, but no matter how I think about it, there is simply no way for me to understand. I cannot tell you how many times I have begged him to speak openly to me. And what does Sensei say? He says only that there is nothing to say, nothing for me to be anxious about, that he has simply become this sort of person, and he will not take the matter up with me. I remained silent. His wife, too, let her words cease. The maid in the servants' room made not the slightest sound. I had entirely forgotten about the burglar. Do you think that I am somehow to blame? His wife asked suddenly. No, I answered. Please do not hide it from me. If I were thought so, it would be more painful than being cut with a knife, she said again. Even so, I believe I have been doing all that I can for Sensei's sake. Why, Sensei himself recognizes that too. So there is no danger. Please set your mind at ease. I will answer for it. His wife smoothed out the ashes in the brazier. Then she poured water from the pitcher into the iron kettle. At once, the kettle's singing grew faint. At last, I could bear it no longer, and I asked, Sensei, if there is something wrong with me, please tell me openly. If it is a fault that can be corrected, I will correct it. And then Sensei said, there is no fault in you. The fault lies only in me. When he says that, I become so sad that I do not know what to do. Tears come into my eyes, and all the more I feel I want to hear what is wrong with me. His wife filled her eyes with tears. Chapter 19. At first, I had regarded Sensei's wife as a woman of understanding. But while I went on talking to her in that spirit, her manner gradually changed. Instead of appealing to my mind, she began to move my heart. Between herself and her husband, there was no estrangement, nor ought there to be. And yet there was something, and whenever she tried to open her eyes and see clearly what it was, there was still nothing there. This was the very point of her suffering. At first, his wife had declared that because Sensei's eyes, with which he looked upon the world, were world-weary, the result was that she too was disliked by him. And yet, even after declaring it so, she could not settle herself in that thought at all. When one broke through to the bottom of it, she was in fact thinking the opposite. She suspected that because Sensei had come to dislike her, he had at last gone on to dislike the world as well. Yet no matter how she labored, she could not pursue that suspicion to its end and make it fact. Sensei's manner to the last was that of a husband. He was kind and gentle. His wife, who had wrapped up that lump of doubt in the daily tenderness of each passing day, and kept it softly hidden in the depth of her breast, opened that bundle before me that evening and showed me what was inside. "What do you think?" she asked. "Was it because of me that he became as he is? Or was it because of what you call his view of life? Or whatever it is? Please tell me without hiding anything." I had no intention of hiding anything. And yet, if there was some unknown thing there, something of which I knew nothing, then whatever answer I might give, it could not possibly satisfy her. And I believed that there was, indeed, some such unknown thing there. "I do not know," I said. At that instant, his wife showed the pitiful expression one sees when expectation has been disappointed. I immediately added to my words, "But at least I can assure you that Sensei does not dislike you. I am only repeating to you what I heard from Sensei's own mouth. Sensei is not a man who tells lies, is he?" His wife made no answer. After a little while, she said this: "The truth is, there is one thing that I have a little reason to suspect about the cause of Sensei's becoming like that. Yes, if that should turn out to be the cause, then at least I would be free of responsibility, and that alone would bring me such relief." "What is it?" His wife, reluctant to speak, kept her eyes upon the hands resting in her lap. "You will judge it for me, won't you, if I tell you? If it is a judgment I am capable of making, I will. I cannot tell you everything. If I told everything, I would be scolded. Only the part I can tell without being scolded, I swallowed with tension. When Sensei was still at the university, he had one friend with whom he was very close. That man died just a little before he was to graduate. He died suddenly, in a voice so low that it was almost a whisper in my ear. His wife said, "The truth is, it was an unnatural death." She said it in such a way that one could not help asking in return, "How?" That is all I am allowed to say. But it was after that happened, that Sensei's nature began little by little to change. Why that man died, I do not know. Sensei himself, I think, probably does not know either. And yet, if one thinks that it was from then on that Sensei changed, it does not seem impossible to think so. Is it that man's grave? I asked. The one at Zoshigaya? That too? I am not supposed to say, so I will not say it. But can a man, merely because he has lost one close friend, change so greatly as all that? It is that which I long to know so desperately. That is why I want you to judge it for me on that one point. My own judgment, if anything, inclined rather toward the negative. Chapter 20. As far as the facts I had laid hold of would allow, I tried to comfort his wife, and his wife, too, seemed to wish as much as possible to be comforted by me. So the two of us went on speaking together of the same matter for a long time. But from the beginning, I had not grasped the root of the affair, and his wife's uneasiness, too, had in truth arisen from no more than a thin cloud of doubt floating there. When it came to the true nature of the event, his wife herself knew very little, and even in the part she did know, she could not tell me everything. Therefore, I, who was trying to comfort her, and his wife, who was being comforted, were both afloat upon the waves, swaying there. And while swaying so, his wife reached out her hand as far as she could, trying to cling to my uncertain judgment. When, at about 10 o'clock, the sound of Sensei's shoes was heard at the entrance, his wife suddenly, as though she had forgotten everything that had passed till then, rose to her feet, leaving me sitting there before her. And she went at once to meet Sensei, almost face to face, as he opened the lattice door. I was left behind and followed after her. Only the maid, who seemed to have been napping somewhere, never came out at all. Sensei, if anything, was in good spirits, but his wife's tone was better still. I, who still remembered the tears that only a little while before had filled her beautiful eyes, and the figure 8 that had gathered at the roots of her dark eyebrows, watched that change with careful attention, as something unusual, if it had not been false. And in fact, it did not seem false. Then it would not have been impossible to take all that his wife had said before as a frivolous woman's game, made up specially, with me as her companion, for the mere pleasure of playing with sentiment. At that time, however, I had no inclination to view her so critically. Seeing her manner suddenly brightened, I felt rather relieved. I thought over again that perhaps there had been no need to worry so much. After all, laughing, Sensei asked me, "Thank you very much. The burglar did not come, I trust?" Then he added, "Does it not leave you feeling rather cheated when he never came?" When I left, his wife bowed and said, "I am very sorry to have troubled you." But her tone sounded less as though she pitied me for having had my time wasted in such a busy season, than like a joke, as though she meant to say she was sorry that, after I had come all that way, no burglar had entered while speaking. So she wrapped up the Western sweets that were left over from what she had set out earlier and placed the packet in my hand. I slipped it into my sleeve and hurried through the chilly little lanes of the cold night with their few passers-by turning this way and that toward the lively quarter of the town. I have drawn out the events of that night from my memory and written them here in detail. I have written them because there is reason to do so. But to tell the truth, when I was going home with the sweets his wife had given me, I did not, in my feelings then, regard the conversation of that evening as something so weighty. The next day, when I came back from school to eat my midday meal and saw the packet of sweets that had been left upon my desk the night before, I at once took from it a brown castella coated with chocolate and began to eat it. And while eating it, I tasted it with the consciousness that the man and woman who had given me this sweet existed in the world as a happy pair. Nothing of any special kind happened until autumn passed away and winter came. As I continued to go in and out of Sensei's house, I would also ask his wife about such things as washing out my clothes or having things made. It was from this time that I, who until then had never worn anything like a juban, began to wear over my shirt those garments with black collars attached. Sensei's wife, having no children, used to say that taking care of such matters was, rather, a way to relieve boredom, and in the end, almost a medicine for the body. This is handwoven, isn't it? I have never sewn a kimono of such fine cloth before, but in return, it is terribly hard to sew. The needle simply will not go through it. I broke 2 needles thanks to it. Even when making complaints like these, his wife never looked the least bit burdened. Chapter 21. When winter came, it happened that I had to return home. In a letter I received from my mother, she wrote that the course of my father's illness was not encouraging, and added that, although there was perhaps no need to fear an immediate crisis, still, at his age, if it were at all possible, she wished I would arrange matters and come home. My father had long suffered from a kidney disease, as is often seen in people past middle age. His illness was a chronic one. In return, however, both he himself and the rest of the family believed without doubt that, so long as he was careful, there would be no sudden change. Indeed, my father used to boast to visitors that it was solely thanks to proper care that he had somehow managed to hold out up to the present day. According to my mother's letter, that father of mine, while out in the garden doing something or other, was suddenly seized with dizziness and fell over. The people in the house, mistaking it for a mild stroke, at once gave him the treatment for that. Only later, when the doctor judged that it did not seem to be that at all, but was probably the result of his old disease, did they begin for the first time to connect the fainting spell with the kidney trouble. There was still a little time left before the winter vacation began. I thought it would do no harm to wait until the end of term, and so I left things as they were for a day or two. But during those 1 or 2 days, the image of my father lying in bed and the face of my worried mother would from time to time rise before my eyes, and each time I tasted a kind of distress. At last, I made up my mind to go home. In order to save the trouble and time of having traveling expenses sent from home, I went to Sensei's house, partly to take my leave and partly to ask him to advance me, for the time being, the money I needed. Sensei had something of a cold, and saying that it was too much trouble to come out into the sitting room, had me shown instead into his study through the glass doors of the study. A soft, beloved sunlight, such as one rarely sees after winter has set in, was falling upon the desk cover. Sensei, in that warm room, had set a large brazier, and on the trivet above it was a metal basin from which steam rose steadily to keep the air from becoming hard to breathe. A serious illness may be one thing, but little colds like this are rather hateful, said Sensei, looking at my face with a bitter smile. Sensei was a man who had never had what could truly be called an illness. When I heard him speak, I felt like laughing. As for me, I would endure something like a cold, but anything worse than that, I would refuse absolutely. You two are the same, Sensei. If you only tried it, you would see. Is that so? Rather than fall ill, I think I should prefer to be stricken with a fatal disease. I paid no particular attention to what Sensei said. I immediately told him about my mother's letter and asked to borrow the money. That is awkward indeed, but for that amount, I ought to have enough on hand now, so take it with you. Sensei called his wife and had her lay out before me the amount I needed. She brought it from the drawer of a tea chest, or something of that sort, in the back room, stacked it carefully upon a sheet of white paper, and said, "That is certainly a great worry for you. Has he fainted many times?" Sensei asked. The letter says nothing about it. Does one collapse like that so many times? For the first time, I learned that the woman who was Sensei's wife's mother had died of the same disease from which my father suffered. It is difficult in any case, is it not? I said. Yes, it is. If I could take his place, I would do so willingly. Does he have nausea? I do not know. Since nothing is written about it, perhaps not. See, so long as nausea has not yet come, he is still all right, said his wife. That very night, I left Tokyo by train. Chapter 22. My father's illness was not as serious as I had feared. Even so, when I arrived, he was sitting cross-legged on the bedding and saying, "Because everyone worries, I am putting up with it and staying here quietly. There is really no reason why I should not get up." But from the next day on, not even listening to my mother's attempts to stop him, he finally had the bed put away altogether. As my mother reluctantly folded up the coarse-woven quilt, she said, "Your father has suddenly grown bold again, now that you have come home." To me, my father's behavior did not seem to be mere bravado. My elder brother held a post far away in Kyushu. Unless something quite extraordinary happened, he was not a man who could easily take the liberty of seeing our parents' faces. My younger sister had been married off to another province. She, too, was not a woman who could simply be summoned back so that she might arrive in time for an emergency. Of the 3 children, the one most conveniently placed was, after all, only I, who was still a student. And the fact that I, just as my mother had asked, had thrown aside my schoolwork and come home before the holidays was a great satisfaction to my father. It is a pity to make him miss school for so slight an illness. It is your mother who writes letters far too alarmingly. That was what my father said with his mouth, and not only said, he also had the bed that had been spread put away, and showed himself as vigorous as usual. You must not be too careless, and bring it on again. My father received this warning of mine pleasantly, but with the utmost lightness. Oh, I shall be all right, so long as I am careful, as usual. And, in fact, my father did seem to be all right. He moved freely about the house, and was troubled neither by shortness of breath nor by dizziness. Only his complexion was far worse than that of an ordinary man. But as this too was not a symptom that had begun only now, we paid it no particular mind. I wrote a letter to Sensei thanking him for the loan. I added that when I came up to Tokyo for the New Year, I would bring it with me, and asked him to wait until then. And I went on to write that my father's condition was not as grave as I had feared, that at this rate we might feel easy for the time being, and that both the dizziness and the nausea were completely absent. At the end, I added a word of inquiry about Sensei's cold as well, for in truth, I had regarded it as a very slight thing. When I sent that letter, I was in no way expecting a reply from Sensei. After sending it, I talked with my father and mother about Sensei and things concerning him, and imagined, far away, Sensei's study. When you go to Tokyo next time, take him some shiitake mushrooms. Yes, but would Sensei eat dried shiitake, I wonder? They are not especially delicious, but there is no one who particularly dislikes them. To me, it felt strange to think of shiitake together with Sensei. When Sensei's reply came, I was somewhat surprised. And I was especially surprised when I found that its contents contained no special business at all. I thought that Sensei had written back to me simply out of kindness, thinking so, that one brief letter gave me great joy. Indeed, this was certainly the first letter I had ever received from Sensei. When I say the first, it may sound as though there had often been an exchange of letters between Sensei and me, but I should like to make it clear that the truth was by no means so. While Sensei was alive, I received only 2 letters from him. One was this brief reply, of which I now speak. The other was the very long one, which Sensei wrote specially to me before he died. Because of the nature of his illness, my father had to refrain from exertion, and so, even after the bedding had been put away, he hardly ever went outdoors. There was one afternoon, on a day of exceptionally mild weather, when he went down into the garden. But even then, fearing that something might happen, I stayed close beside him, as though supporting him. Even when, in my anxiety, I tried to make him rest his hand upon my shoulder, my father only laughed and would not do it. Chapter 23. As a companion for my father's boredom, I often sat down before the shogi board with him. Both of us were by nature indolent, so while sitting in the kotatsu, we would place the board on top of the turret stand, and every time we moved a piece, we would deliberately draw a handout from under the quilt. To do so, at times, one of the captured pieces would go missing, and neither of us would notice it until the next game began. There was even the comical occasion when my mother found such a piece among the ashes and lifted it out with the fire tongs. If it were go, the board would be too high, and besides, it has legs, so you could not play it on top of the kotatsu. But that is where a shogi board is convenient. You can play so easily like this. It is just the thing for lazy people. Come, let us have one more game. Whenever my father won, he always said, "Come, let us have one more game." And yet, when he lost, he also said, "Come, let us have one more game." In short, whether he won or whether he lost, he was a man who liked to warm himself at the kotatsu and play shogi. At first, because it was novel, this retired old man's amusement held a fair amount of interest, even for me. But as the days went by, the vigor of my youth could no longer be satisfied with so slight a stimulus. Holding in my fist a gold general or a lance, I would from time to time stretch my arm above my head and yawn with complete abandon. I thought of Tokyo, and deep within the tide of blood that swelled through my heart, I heard a pulsation beating on and on. Activity, activity. Strangely enough, from some delicate state of consciousness, that very sound of the pulse seemed to be strengthened by the power of Sensei. In my heart, I compared my father and Sensei. Seen from the world, both were quiet men, so quiet that one might scarcely tell whether they were alive or dead. In the matter of being recognized by others, both stood at zero, and yet my father, who only wished to play shogi, was not enough for me, even as a mere companion for amusement. Sensei, who I knew had never gone about the streets for diversion, had somehow come to influence my mind more deeply than any intimacy born of pleasure and cheerful companionship. Only the word mind sounds much too cold, and so I would rather say my breast. Whether one were to say that Sensei's force had bitten its way into my flesh, or that Sensei's life was flowing within my blood, it would not have seemed to me then the least exaggeration. It was only when I deliberately placed before my eyes the plain fact that my father was truly my own father, while Sensei was, needless to say, a complete stranger, that I was startled, as though I had discovered some great truth for the first time. As I grew sluggish, my father and mother too, almost at the same pace, began to find me less novel than before. This is perhaps a feeling that everyone experiences who returns home for the summer holidays or the like. For about the first week, one is welcomed, petted, and treated as though one could not be cherished enough. But once that peak has been passed, as regularly as by rule, the warmth of the family gradually begins to cool. And, in the end, one comes to be treated rather carelessly, as though it scarcely mattered whether one were there or not. During my stay, I too passed beyond that peak. And besides, each time I returned home, I brought back from Tokyo something strange, something that neither my father nor my mother could understand. In the old phrase, it was as though one were carrying the smell of Christianity into the house of a Confucian scholar. What I brought back did not harmonize with either of them. Of course, I concealed it, yet because it was something already clinging to me, however much I tried not to show it, before I knew it, it caught the eyes of my father and mother. I began to feel discontented. I wanted to return to Tokyo as quickly as possible. Fortunately, my father's illness remained just as it was and showed no sign at all of advancing for the worse, even when, for greater certainty, we deliberately summoned a doctor of some standing from far away and had him examine him with the utmost care. No abnormality was found beyond what I already knew. I decided to leave home a little before the end of the winter vacation. But when I announced that I was leaving, human feeling being a curious thing, both my father and my mother opposed it. "So soon? Are you going back already? It is still too early," said my mother. "You could stay another 4 or 5 days and still be in time, couldn't you?" said my father. But I did not alter the day of departure that I had fixed for myself. Chapter 24. When I returned to Tokyo, the New Year's decorations had already been taken down. The town, left to the cold wind that blew through it, showed nowhere any trace of holiday brightness. Worth speaking of, I went at once to Sensei's house to return the money. I took along, at the same time, the shiitake mushrooms as well. It seemed a little strange simply to hand them over, so I made a point of saying, "My mother asked me to bring you this," and then placed them before his wife. The mushrooms were packed in a new confectionery box. His wife thanked me politely, and when she rose to carry the box into the next room, she lifted it and perhaps was surprised by how light it was, for she asked, "What kind of sweets are these?" Once one grew familiar with her, his wife would sometimes show in such little things an innocent simplicity, almost childlike. Among the many anxious questions which both of them repeated about my father's illness, Sensei said this: "From the way you describe his condition, it does not seem that there is any immediate danger, but the disease is the disease, so one must be extremely careful." Sensei knew many things about kidney disease that I did not know. The special trait of that illness is that a man may be suffering from it and yet remain unaware, quite at ease. An officer I once knew was finished by it in the end, and the way he died was almost unbelievable. Why, the wife who was sleeping at his side had no time at all to nurse him or do anything. In the middle of the night, he merely said that he felt a little unwell and woke her, and By the next morning, he was already dead, and all the while his wife thought he was only sleeping. Until then, I had been inclined to optimism, but I suddenly became uneasy. Could my father also become like that? One cannot say he could not. What does the doctor say? The doctor says he cannot possibly recover, but he also says that for the time being, there is no cause for alarm. Then that is good. If the doctor says so, the man I have just told you of was one who had remained unaware of it. And besides, he was a rather reckless military man. I was somewhat reassured. Sensei, who had been watching my change of expression, closely added this afterward. And yet, whether in health or in illness, human beings are fragile creatures. There is no knowing when, through what cause, or in what manner one may die. So, you think about such things too, Sensei? Even I, strong as I am, do not fail to think of them from time to time. At the corners of Sensei's mouth, I saw the shadow of a smile. There are people, are there not, who die quite suddenly, naturally, and there are others who die in an instant, before one can even think through unnatural violence. What do you mean by unnatural violence? I do not really know what I mean by it either. But all those who kill themselves must surely be using an unnatural violence. Then, if a man is killed by someone else, that too is by means of unnatural violence, is it not? The one who is killed has not thought about it at all. Yes, when you put it that way, it is so. That day, I went home after that. Even after I returned, my father's illness did not weigh very heavily on me, nor did Sensei's words about dying naturally or dying through unnatural violence leave upon my mind anything more than the shallow impression of the moment. They left no further hold upon my thoughts. Instead, I remembered that the graduation thesis which I had so many times been about to begin, only to draw back my hand, must now at last be taken up in earnest. Chapter 25. As a companion for my father's boredom. I often sat down before the shogi board with him. Both of us were by nature indolent, so while sitting in the kotatsu, we would place the board on top of the turret stand, and every time we moved a piece, we would deliberately draw a hand out from under the quilt to do so. At times, one of the captured pieces would go missing, and neither of us would notice it until the next game began. There was even the comical occasion when my mother found such a piece among the ashes and lifted it out with the fire tongs. If it were go, the board would be too high, and besides, it has legs, so you could not play it on top of the kotatsu. But that is where a shogi board is convenient. You can play so easily like this. It is just the thing for lazy people. Come, let us have one more game. Whenever my father won, he always said, "Come, let us have one more game." And yet, when he lost, he also said, "Come, let us have one more game." In short, whether he won or whether he lost, he was a man who liked to warm himself at the kotatsu and play shogi. At first, because it was novel, this retired old man's amusement held a fair amount of interest, even for me. But as the days went by, The vigor of my youth could no longer be satisfied with so slight a stimulus. Holding in my fist a gold general or a lance, I would from time to time stretch my arm above my head and yawn with complete abandon. I thought of Tokyo, and deep within the tide of blood that swelled through my heart, I heard a pulsation beating on and on. Activity, activity. Strangely enough, from some delicate state of consciousness, that very sound of the pulse seemed to be strengthened by the power of Sensei. In my heart, I compared my father and Sensei. Seen from the world, both were quiet men, so quiet that one might scarcely tell whether they were alive or dead. In the matter of being recognized by others, both stood at zero. And yet, my father, who only wished to play shogi, was not enough for me, even as a mere companion for amusement. Sensei, who I knew had never gone about the streets for diversion, had somehow come to influence my mind more deeply than any intimacy born of pleasure and cheerful companionship. Only the word mind sounds much too cold, and so I would rather say my breast. Whether one were to say that Sensei's force had bitten its way into my flesh, or that Sensei's life was flowing within my blood, it would not have seemed to me then the least exaggeration. It was only when I deliberately placed before my eyes the plain fact that my father was truly my own father, while Sensei was, needless to say, a complete stranger, that I was startled, as though I had discovered some great truth for the first time. As I grew sluggish, my father and mother too, almost at the same pace, began to find me less novel than before. This is perhaps a feeling that everyone experiences who returns home for the summer holidays or the like. For about the first week, one is welcomed, petted, and treated as though one could not be cherished enough. But once that peak has been passed, as regularly as by rule, the warmth of the family gradually begins to cool, and in the end, one comes to be treated rather carelessly, as though it scarcely mattered whether one were there or not. During my stay, I too passed beyond that peak, and besides, each time I returned home, I brought back from Tokyo something strange, something that neither my father nor my mother could understand. In the old phrase, it was as though one were carrying the smell of Christianity into the house of a Confucian scholar. What I brought back did not harmonize with either of them. Of course, I concealed it, yet because it was something already clinging to me, however much I tried not to show it, before I knew it, it caught the eyes of my father and mother. I began to feel discontented. I wanted to return to Tokyo as quickly as possible. Fortunately, my father's illness remained just as it was and showed no sign at all of advancing for the worse, even when, for greater certainty, we deliberately summoned a doctor of some standing from far away and had him examine him with the utmost care. No abnormality was found beyond what I already knew. I decided to leave home a little before the end of the winter vacation. But when I announced that I was leaving, human feeling being a curious thing, both my father and my mother opposed it. "So soon? Are you going back already?" "It is still too early," said my mother. "You could stay another 4 or 5 days and still be in time, couldn't you?" said my father. But I did not alter the day of departure that I had fixed for myself. Chapter 26. The time when I was set free was the early summer season, when upon the branches from which the double cherry blossoms had already fallen, a haze of green leaves had begun before I knew it to stretch itself out. With the heart of a little bird escaped from its cage, I looked out at the wide heaven and earth in a single glance and beat my wings freely. I went at once to Sensei's house. Along the way, my eyes were caught by the hedge of trifoliate orange, where, upon the darkened branches, buds were breaking forth as though they were about to burst into flame, and by the withered trunk of a pomegranate tree, from which glossy, reddish-brown leaves, soft and tender in appearance, were reflecting the sunlight. I felt as though I were seeing such things for the first time in my life. Seeing my happy face, Sensei said, "So your thesis is finished at last? That is excellent. At last, thanks to you, it is done. There is now nothing left at all for me to do," I said. And in truth, at that time, I felt as though all the work that ought to be done by me had already been completed, and that from now on I might boldly spend my days in idleness. Toward the thesis I had written, I felt complete confidence and satisfaction. In front of Sensei, I spoke at length, with great eagerness, about its contents. In his usual way, Sensei said only, "I see," or "Is that so?" But he added not the slightest criticism beyond that. Rather than feeling simply dissatisfied, I felt, to some degree, as though the effect had fallen flat. Even so, that day my spirits were so lively that they were ready to attempt a counterattack upon Sensei's manner, which seemed to me somewhat inert. I tried to draw Sensei out into the great nature that was putting forth its fresh blue-green life again. "Sensei, let us go somewhere for a walk. It feels wonderfully good outside." Where to? I did not care where. I only wanted to take Sensei with me and go out into the outskirts. An hour later, Sensei and I, just as I had wished, had left the city behind and were walking aimlessly through a quiet place that could hardly be called either village or town. From a hedge of spindle trees, I plucked young, tender leaves and made a grass whistle sing. I had a friend from Kagoshima, and by imitating him and learning naturally from him, I had become skillful at blowing this sort of grass whistle. As I kept on blowing it, with some pride, Sensei, pretending not to notice, walked on, looking elsewhere. Before long, a narrow path opened beneath a small rise, thick and rounded as though shut in by young leaves. On the signboard fastened to the gatepost was written, "Such and such garden," so it was immediately clear that the place was not a private residence. Gazing at the entrance, which sloped gently upward, Sensei said, "Shall we go in? It is a gardener's place, is it not?" I answered at once, Winding once through the planted shrubs and going up toward the back, we found a house on the left. Inside the open shoji, all was empty, and not a trace of any person was to be seen. Only the goldfish, kept in a large basin set beneath the eaves, were moving. How quiet it is! I wonder whether it is all right to go in without asking. And the two of us went on again toward the farther end. But there, too, not a single human figure was to be seen. The azaleas were blooming in wild profusion as though they burned. Among them, pointing to one tall shrub of a deep russet hue, Sensei said, "That must be a kirishima, mustn't it?" There was also a bed of peonies planted over more than 10 tsubo of ground. But since the season had not yet come, there was not a single stalk bearing a flower. Beside this peony bed stood something like an old wooden bench. Upon it, Sensei stretched himself out, flat on his back, his arms and legs spread wide. I sat down at the remaining end and smoked a cigarette. Sensei was looking up at the blue sky, clear and transparent, as if one could see through it. I was absorbed by the color of the young leaves that wrapped me round. And when I looked closely at that color, every single leaf was different. Even on the same maple tree, there was not one that wore upon its branches exactly the same shade. Sensei's hat, which had been thrown over the top of a slender cedar sapling, was blown down by the wind. Chapter 27. I at once picked up the hat, flicking away with my fingernail the red earth that clung to it here and there. I called to Sensei, "Sensei, your hat has fallen." "Thank you." Half raising his body as he took it from me, Sensei, remaining in that posture, which was neither sitting up nor lying down, asked me a strange question. "It is sudden, but does your family have a good deal of property?" "Not enough to call it property." "Well, about how much is there?" "It may seem rude to ask as per how much. There are only some mountains and some rice fields. I do not suppose there is any money at all." This was the first time Sensei had asked anything like a question about the financial condition of my family. As for me, I had not yet asked him a single thing about his own way of living. When I first came to know Sensei, I wondered how it was that he could live in idleness. Even afterward, that doubt never wholly left my breast, but I had always refrained from bringing so naked a question before Sensei, thinking it nothing but ill-bred. My mind, which had been resting its eyes, tired by the colors of the young leaves, happened once more to touch upon that old doubt. "And what about you, Sensei? How much property do you possess? Do I look like a wealthy man?" Sensei had always, as a rule, dressed rather simply, and his household was a small one. Accordingly, his house, too, was by no means large, yet the material comfort of his life was plain even to my eyes, though I had not entered into the inner circle of the household. In short, Sensei's way of living, though it could not be called luxurious, was not one of those pitifully pinched and stiff existences that have no elasticity. It would seem so, I said. Well, I have that much money. Certainly, but I am by no means a wealthy man. If I were, I should build a larger house than this. By this time, Sensei had sat up and was sitting cross-legged upon the bench. When he had finished saying this, he began, with the tip of his bamboo cane, to draw something like a circle upon the ground. When that was done, he next stuck the cane down, straight into the earth. Even so, I was once a wealthy man. Sensei's words were half like a soliloquy, and because of that, I failed at once to follow after them, and merely remained silent. Even so, I was once a wealthy man, you know, Sensei repeated. Then, looking at my face, he smiled. Even then, I said nothing, or rather, I was too awkward to answer. Then, Sensei shifted the subject elsewhere. And how has your father's illness been since then? Since the new year, I had heard nothing about my father's illness. The short letters that came from home, together with the monthly remittance, were, as usual, in my father's hand, but among them there was scarcely any complaint of illness to be found. Moreover, the handwriting itself was firm. The trembling, often seen in this sort of invalid, did not in the least disturb the movement of his brush. He has written nothing at all, so I suppose he is well now. It is good if he is well, but the illness is what it is. So, after all, it is no good, do you think? Still, for the time being, I suppose it is holding its own. He writes nothing at all. Is that so? I listened to Sensei's asking about the property of my family and inquiring after my father's illness, as though they were nothing more than ordinary conversation, the sort of ordinary talk in which a man simply speaks aloud whatever comes into his mind. Yet beneath Sensei's words, there lay a large meaning that joined the two together. I, who had no experience of Sensei's own kind, had, of course, no way of noticing it. Chapter 28. If your family has property, then I think it ought to be properly arranged. While there is still time, though it is none of my business, would it not be better to see that whatever is to come to you is settled properly, while your father is still alive and well? If anything should happen, the thing that causes the most trouble afterward is always the matter of property. Yes, I did not pay very much attention to Sensei's words. I believed that in my family there was not a single person, not I, not my father, not my mother, who entertained any such anxiety. Besides, I was somewhat surprised that what Sensei said should be, for him, so excessively practical. But my usual respect for an elder made me keep silence. If it offends you that I should use words which assume from this very moment your father's death, forgive me, but men do die. However sound a man may be, one never knows when he may die. Sensei's tone was bitter, unusually so. I am not troubled by such a thing at all, I said in explanation. How many brothers and sisters did you have? Sensei asked. And beyond that, Sensei asked how many there were in my family, whether I had relatives, what sort of people my uncles and aunts were, and such things. Then, at last, he said this: "Are they all good people? There do not seem to be any of them who are bad enough to be called bad. They are mostly country people." Why is it that country people are not bad? I was troubled by this pursuit. But Sensei did not give me even the leisure to consider my reply. Country people are, if anything, worse than city people. And then, just now, you said that among your relatives there did not seem to be anyone particularly bad. But do you imagine that there exists in this world a certain type of man called a bad man? There can be no such villain cast in a mold. In ordinary times, everyone is a good person, or at least everyone is an ordinary human being. And then, when the critical moment comes, they suddenly change into bad men. That is what is frightening. That is why one cannot let down one's guard. Sensei did not seem about to stop there. I too was about to say something. Just then, from behind us, a dog suddenly began to bark. Sensei and I both started and turned around. From the side of the bench toward the rear, there grew a thicket of young cedar saplings, and beside them, dwarf bamboo spread thickly enough to cover about 3 tubo of ground. The dog showed its face and back above the dwarf bamboo and barked furiously. Then a child, about 10 years old, came running up and scolded the dog. Still wearing a black cap with a badge on it, the child came around before Sensei and bowed. "Uncle, when you came in, was there no one at the house?" he asked. "There was no one, but my older sister and my mother were over by the kitchen." "Is that so? They were there?" "Yes. Uncle, you ought to have said, 'Today, if I may,' and come in properly." Sensei smiled bitterly. He took out his purse from his breast and pressed a 5-sen white copper coin into the child's hand. "Tell your mother that, won't you? Tell her, please let us rest here for a little while." The child, with a bright, clever look and laughter filling his eyes, nodded. "I am the scout captain today, you know." With that explanation, the child ran down through the azaleas toward the lower ground. The dog, too, with its tail curled high, ran after the child. Before long, 2 or 3 other children, about the same age, also ran in the direction the scout captain had taken. Chapter 29. Because of the dog and the child, Sensei's talk could not continue to its conclusion, and so, in the end, I was left without ever grasping its full meaning. At that time, I had absolutely none of the anxieties about property that so troubled Sensei. By nature, and from the circumstances of my life as well, there was in me then no room to torment my mind with thoughts of profit and loss. When I think of it now, this was no doubt because I had not yet gone out into the world, and also because I had not yet stood before such realities myself. At any rate, to my young self, for some reason, the question of money seemed very far away. Of all that Sensei had said, the one thing I had wanted to hear explained to the very bottom was what he meant by saying that at the critical moment, any human being will turn into a bad man. As a mere phrase, there was nothing in it that I could not understand. And yet, about that sentence, I wanted to know more. After the dog and the child had gone away, the broad garden of young leaves returned once more to its former stillness. And we too, like men bound fast by silence, remained for a while without moving. The lovely color of the sky was by then gradually losing its light. Most of the trees before our eyes were maples, and the light green of the young leaves that had sprouted upon their branches, as though dripping there, seemed to grow steadily darker. From a distant road came the rumbling sound of a cart being drawn. I imagined it to be some villager taking potted plants or something of the sort to a festival fair. The moment Sensei heard that sound, he rose suddenly like a man who had been lost in meditation, and all at once draws breath again. It is time we started back. The days do seem to have grown considerably longer, but even so, while one sits at ease like this, before one knows it, evening has come. Across Sensei's back there clung all the marks of where he had lain upon the bench, face upward, a little while before. I brushed them off with both my hands. Thank you. There is no grease stuck there, is there? It has come off clean. This houri was made only the other day, so if I go home, having soiled it carelessly, my wife will scold me. Thank you. The two of us came again before the house. Halfway down the slope, when we had entered, there had seemed to be no one there. But now, on the veranda, the mistress of the house was winding thread onto a spool with a girl of 15 or 16 beside her. From next to the large goldfish basin, the two of us bowed and said, "Thank you very much for allowing us to disturb you." The mistress answered, "Not at all. We did nothing for you." And then, after that, she thanked us for the white copper coin given a little while before to the child. When we had come 2 or 3 chos beyond the gate, I at last opened the subject to Sensei. What you said a little while ago, Sensei, that at the critical moment any man may become a bad man. What did you mean by that? Mean. There is no deep meaning. It is simply a fact, not a theory. It may be a fact, and I have no objection to that. But what I wish to ask is what you mean by the critical moment. What sort of situation does it refer to? Sensei burst out laughing, as though, now that the moment had passed, he no longer had any spirit left to explain it with earnestness. Money, my boy. The sight of money will turn even a gentleman at once into a bad man. Sensei's reply was far too commonplace to satisfy me. Just as Sensei himself was no longer in the mood, I too felt something like a collapse of expectation. Composing my face, I set off walking quickly. As a result, Sensei fell slightly behind. From the rear, Sensei called out, "Well now, look at that." At what? Why? At your state of mind. Even it changes at once, with a single answer from me. Looking at my face as I had turned back and stopped to wait for him, Sensei said this. Chapter 30. At that time, in the depths of my heart, I felt a resentment towards Sensei. Even after we began again to walk side by side, I deliberately refrained from asking what I truly wanted to ask. But whether Sensei noticed my attitude or did not notice it, he showed no sign at all of minding it. As usual, he went on with his calm, composed step, inclined to silence. And so I grew a little irritated. I began to feel that somehow, by saying something, I wanted to strike back at him once. "Sensei, what is it?" "A little while ago, you became somewhat excited, did you not, when we were resting in the gardener's yard?" "I have rarely seen you excited, Sensei, but today I felt I had witnessed something unusual." Sensei did not answer at once. I took that both as though I had struck home and as though I had missed the mark. Since there was no help for it, I decided to say no more. Then suddenly, Sensei moved toward the edge of the road. There, beneath a neatly clipped hedge, he gathered up the hem of his garment and relieved himself. I stood there vaguely, waiting while Sensei finished. "Excuse me." Saying that, Sensei began to walk again. At last, I gave up all thought of getting the better of him. The road along which we passed gradually grew livelier. The wide slopes of fields and the open level ground, which until then had appeared here and there, ceased altogether to meet the eye as houses lined both sides of the road. Even so, here and there, at the corners of house lots, one could still quietly see pea vines twined about bamboo poles, or chickens kept enclosed within wire netting. Pack horses returning from the city passed us one after another, without end, because I am the sort of person whose attention is easily stolen by such things. The matter that had been in my heart only a little while before slipped away and was dropped somewhere out of mind. When Sensei suddenly returned to it, I had truly forgotten it. Did I really seem so excited a little while ago? Not so much as all that, but a little. No, it does not matter if I did seem so, for in truth, I do become excited. Whenever the subject of property arises, I am certain to become excited. I do not know how I appear to you, but I am, for all that, a very tenacious man. An insult or an injury received from others, whether 10 years pass or 20 years pass, I never forget it. Sensei's words were more excited than before, but what startled me was by no means their tone. Rather, it was the very meaning with which his words struck my ears. That I should hear such a confession from Sensei's mouth was, for even me, something wholly unexpected. Never before had I so much as imagined such a power of attachment as one feature of Sensei's nature. I had believed him a weaker man than that, and it was in that weakness and in the height that rose from it that I had planted the root of my affection for him. I, who had tried in a passing mood to raise a little shield against Sensei, grew small before these words. Then Sensei said this: I was deceived by others, and I was deceived, moreover, by relatives bound to me by blood. I never forget it. Those people who seem to have been good men in my father's eyes changed the very moment my father died into scoundrels whose want of principle could not be forgiven. The humiliation and the injury that I received from them I have been made to carry from the time I was a child until this very day. Perhaps I shall be made to carry them all the way until I die. I shall never be able to forget it so long as I live. And yet, I have still taken no revenge. When I think of it, what I am doing now goes beyond revenge against particular persons. It is not merely that I hate them. I have learned to hate, in general, the thing called man, the human being that they represent. And I think that is enough. I could not bring even a word of consolation to my lips. Chapter 31. That day's conversation, too, came to an end without developing any further. Rather, I was overawed by Sensei's manner and had no heart to press on. The two of us boarded a streetcar from the edge of the city, but inside the car we scarcely spoke at all. Soon after we got off, we had to part. When we parted, Sensei had changed again. In a brighter tone than usual, he said, "From now until June is the easiest time of all. It may even be the easiest time in your whole life. Make the most of it and enjoy yourself." I smiled and took off my hat. At that moment, looking at Sensei's face, I wondered in what part of his heart he could possibly be harboring hatred for mankind in general. In his eyes, in his mouth, there was nowhere the shadow of world weariness. I confess that on questions of thought, I received great benefit from Sensei. Yet I must also say that there were times when, however much I wished to receive such benefit on those same questions, I was unable to do so. Sensei's talk would sometimes end without becoming clear. The conversation that had taken place between us that day in the outskirts remained in the back of my mind as one example of that lack of clarity. Being a blunt fellow, I finally one day spoke of it openly to Sensei. Sensei was smiling, and I said this: "It does not matter if my head is too dull to grasp your meaning, but when you understand it perfectly and still do not speak plainly, that is what troubles me. I am hiding nothing from you. You are hiding something. I wonder whether you are not confusing my thoughts and opinions with my past. I may be a poor philosopher, but the ideas I have put together with my own mind I do not go about hiding from people. For no reason. There is no need to hide them. But if it is to be required that I must narrate my whole past before you, then that becomes another matter. I do not think it is another matter. It is because your past gave birth to your thought that I set such store by it. If the two are separated, then for me, they become almost valueless. I cannot be satisfied with being given a doll into which no soul has been breathed. Sensei looked at my face with an expression as if to say he was astonished. The hand with which he held his cigarette trembled slightly. You are bold. I am only earnest. I wish, in earnest, to receive instruction from life itself. Even if it means laying bare my past, the word laying bare struck my ear with a sudden, terrible resonance. I felt, for that instant, as though the man sitting before me now were not Sensei whom I had always respected, but some criminal. Sensei's face was pale. Are you truly earnest? Sensei pressed me. Because of the chain of cause in my past, I have become a man who is suspicious of others. So, in truth, I am suspicious even of you, and yet you alone I do not wish to suspect. You seem far too simple to be suspected. Before I die, I wish to die trusting at least one single person. Can you become that one person? Will you become him? Are you earnest from the bottom of your heart? If my life itself is earnest, then what I have just said is earnest as well. My voice trembled. Very well, said Sensei. I shall tell you everything of my past, without leaving out a single thing. In return, no, that does not matter. And yet, my past may not prove so useful to you as you imagine. It may be better for you not to hear it. And besides, I cannot speak now, so you must understand that I shall not speak until the proper time comes. Even after I returned to my lodging, I continued to feel a kind of pressure upon me. Chapter 32. My thesis, it seemed, did not appear as good in my professor's eyes as it had in my own estimation. Even so, I passed just as I had expected. On the day of the graduation ceremony, I took out from my trunk an old winter suit grown musty with age and put it on. When I stood in the hall, all around me, every face looked overheated. I found myself at a loss, with my own body sealed up beneath the thick broadcloth through which no wind passed. After standing there for a while, the handkerchief in my hand was soaked through. As soon as the ceremony was over, I went straight home and stripped myself naked. Opening the upstairs window of my lodging, I looked out over as much of the world as could be seen through the hollow of the diploma rolled up tightly, like a spyglass. Then I tossed that diploma onto my desk, and, stretching myself out, full length, I lay down in the middle of the room. As I lay there, I looked back upon my own past. Then again, I imagined my future, and this diploma, which stood between the two and drew a line to divide them, seemed to me a strange sheet of paper, as though it had meaning, and yet as though it had none. That evening, I went to Sensei's house, having been invited there to dinner. This was in accordance with our earlier agreement that if I graduated, I should not dine elsewhere that evening, but should take my supper at Sensei's table. As promised, the dining table had been set near the veranda in the guest room. The thick tablecloth, woven with patterns and stiff with starch, beautiful and spotless, reflected the electric light. Whenever I ate at Sensei's house, it was always upon such a white linen cloth as one sees in Western restaurants with chopsticks and teacups laid upon it, and it was invariably fresh from the wash, pure white. It is the same as collars and cuffs. If one is to use something soiled, it is better to use from the first something colored instead. If it is to be white, then it must be pure white. When he put it so, it was plain enough that Sensei was fastidious. His study, too, was arranged with perfect order. To a careless man, like myself, such traits of Sensei's often stood out very clearly. Sensei is rather particular, isn't he? I once said to his wife, and his wife replied, "Yet with such things as clothes, he does not seem to mind so very much." Sensei, who happened to overhear this, said, "To tell the truth, it is in my mind that I am particular, and because of that, I am always suffering. When I think of it, it is really a very foolish disposition." And he laughed, whether by being particular in mind he meant what people commonly call nervousness, or whether he meant that he was morally scrupulous. I could not tell. It did not seem that his wife fully understood it either. That evening, I sat facing Sensei before the familiar white tablecloth. His wife, with the two of us to right and left, took the seat alone, facing the garden. "Congratulations," said Sensei, raising his cup, "for my sake." To that cup, I did not feel so much joy. Of course, one reason was that my own heart did not possess the kind of soaring delight that would leap up and answer to the word. Yet the way Sensei said it too was by no means light and buoyant, the sort of tone that stirs joy in another. Sensei raised his cup with a smile. In that smile, I found not the slightest trace of ill-natured irony. At the same time, I could not draw from it any true feeling of congratulation either. Sensei's smile seemed rather to say to me, in such a case as this, the world is very fond of saying, "Congratulations." His wife said to me, "How splendid! Your father and mother must be so pleased." At once, I thought of my sick father. I felt that I must hurry to take that diploma home and show it to him. "What became of your diploma, Sensei?" I asked. "What did become of it? I wonder, was it still put away somewhere?" Sensei asked his wife. "Yes, I am sure it must be put away somewhere." Neither of them knew very well where Sensei's diploma was. Chapter 33. When the meal began, his wife had the maid, who was sitting nearby, withdraw into the next room and took upon herself the role of serving us. This seemed to be the custom in Sensei's house for guests who were not formal visitors. The first one or two times, I too had felt constrained, but as my visits increased, It became nothing at all for me to hold out my bowl before his wife. Tea? Rice? You do eat a great deal, don't you? At times, his wife, too, would venture to say such things to me without reserve. But that day, the season being what it was, my appetite did not go so far as to give her occasion to tease me so much. No more? You have become very small in your eating lately, haven't you? It isn't that I have become a small eater. It is only that, because of the heat, I cannot eat. After his wife had the maid clear away the table, she had ice cream and fruit brought in afresh. This was made here at home. It seemed that his wife, having no pressing occupation, had enough leisure to treat guests to homemade ice cream. I had my dish filled twice over. Now that you have at last graduated, what do you intend to do next? Sensei had shifted his seat halfway toward the veranda and was leaning with his back against the shoji beside the sill. I had no more awareness than that I had graduated and no purpose at all as to what I should do next. When his wife saw me hesitating to answer, she asked, "A teacher?" When I still gave no reply, she asked again, "Then a government official?" Both Sensei and I burst out laughing. To tell the truth, I have not yet thought of doing anything at all. In fact, so far as occupations go, I am almost in the state of never having thought about such a thing at all. After all, which is good and which is bad, I suppose one cannot know that without first trying it oneself. That is why the choice is difficult. That is true enough. And yet, the truth is, it is only because you have property that you can say such easygoing things. Look at someone who is in difficulties, and you will see that he cannot possibly sit as calmly as you do. Among my friends, there were some who, before even graduating, had already been looking for positions as middle school teachers. Inwardly, I acknowledged the truth of what his wife said. Yet, I answered thus, "Perhaps I have been somewhat infected by Sensei. What a poor way to be infected." Sensei smiled bitterly. "I do not mind if you are infected, but in return, as I told you the other day, see that while your father is still alive, you have a proper share of the property set aside for you. Otherwise, you can never let down your guard." Together with Sensei, I remembered that beginning of May, when, deep in the wide garden of the gardener, in the outskirts, we had spoken among the blooming azaleas, and on the road home from there, I heard once more in the depths of my ear those forceful words. Sensei had spoken to me in an excited tone. They were not only forceful, they were rather terrifying words. Yet, because I did not know the facts, they were at the same time words that did not wholly penetrate me. "Madam, does your household have a great deal property? Why ever do you ask such a thing?" Because even when I ask Sensei, he will not tell me. His wife, laughing, looked at Sensei's face. "That is probably because there is not enough to tell you about. But if I am to go home and negotiate with my father for a share, it would serve as a point of reference to know how much a man must have in order to live as Sensei does. So please tell me, Sensei turned toward the garden and sat there quietly smoking his cigarette. Naturally, the one who had to answer was his wife. It is nothing so grand as to deserve to be called a certain amount. Enough, perhaps, to go on living somehow or other like this. That is all, my dear. But never mind that. The important thing is that you must really do something from now on. If you merely lie about idling away your days, like Sensei, I do not merely lie about idling. Sensei turned back only his face a little and denied his wife's words. Chapter 34. That night, I took my leave of Sensei's house a little after 10 o'clock. As I was to leave for home within 2 or 3 days, I spoke a few words of farewell before rising. For some time now, I shall not have the pleasure of seeing you again. You will be back in September, will you not? Said his wife. Now that I had graduated, there was no longer any absolute need for me to return in September. But neither had I thought of coming up to Tokyo in the height of August to spend the hottest part of the summer there. I did not possess what could be called precious time to devote to seeking a position. Well, it will probably be around September. Then farewell for a while. As for us, this summer, we too may perhaps go away somewhere. It seems likely to be terribly hot. If we go, I shall send you a picture postcard. Where are you thinking of going? If you do go. Sensei listened to this exchange with a smiling face. We have not yet decided whether we shall go or not. Just as I was about to rise, Sensei suddenly stopped me and asked, "By the way, how is your father's illness?" I knew almost nothing about my father's health. Since no word had come, I merely supposed that things could not be worse. It is not an illness that can be thought of so easily. Once uremia appears, it is all over. Neither the word nor the meaning of uremia was known to me. When I had spoken with the doctor at home during the winter vacation, I had heard no such technical term at all. "You must truly take great care of him," said his wife as well. "When the poison begins to go to the brain, that is the end. You know, this is no laughing matter." Being inexperienced, I felt uneasy, yet still smiled foolishly. Since it is said to be a disease from which one cannot recover, there is no use, after all, in worrying too much. If one can bring oneself to think so decisively, then that is the end of it certainly. His wife, perhaps remembering her own mother, who had died of the same illness, said this in a subdued tone and lowered her eyes. Then I, too, felt genuinely sorry for the fate that awaited my father. At that moment, Sensei suddenly turned toward his wife. "Shizu, will you die before I do, I wonder?" "Why?" "For no reason. I only ask. Or will it be I who am disposed of before you?" In the world, it seems to be taken almost as the natural order that the husband dies first and the wife remains behind. It is not fixed so absolutely as that. Still, the man is, after all, older, is he not? So that is the logic by which he dies first. Then it would follow that I too must go to the other world before you. You are an exception. Am I? Of course. Why, you are so strong. There has scarcely ever been a case of your being ill. However one looks at it, it is I who shall go first. First? Yes, certainly first. Sensei looked at my face. I smiled. But suppose it is I who go first. Then what will you do? What would I do? There his wife faltered. It seemed that an imaginary grief at Sensei's death had for a moment come over her heart, but when she raised her face again, her mood had already changed. What would I do? Why, there would be nothing to be done, would there, my dear? Since even old and young are uncertain. And turning deliberately toward me, she said this as though in jest. Chapter 35. I settled myself down again, where I had half risen, and remained with them until their talk came to a pause. What do you think? Sensei asked. Whether Sensei would die first, or whether his wife would go sooner, was of course no question that I could judge. I only smiled. One never knows about a lifespan. Not I either. This, of all things, really is a matter of lifespan. One is born, you know, with the proper number of years already allotted, so there is no help for it. Sensei's father and mother, too, you know, died at almost the same time. On the same day? Not literally on the same day, of course, but almost the same. Why, one died close upon the other. This was something new to me, and it struck me as strange. How was it that they died so nearly together? His wife was about to answer my question, but Sensei cut her off. Let us not talk about that. It is trivial. Sensei deliberately made the round fan in his hand flutter noisily. Then he looked again at his wife. Shizu, if I die, I shall leave this house to you. His wife burst out laughing. Then please give me the land as well. The land belongs to someone else, so that cannot be managed. But everything I possess, I shall leave to you. Thank you very much. But if I receive nothing but books in foreign languages, what use will they be to me? Sell them to a second-hand bookseller. And how much would they fetch? Yet his talk did not easily part from that distant subject. His own death, and that death was always spoken of on the assumption that it would come while his wife was still alive before him. At first, his wife seemed deliberately to be giving him frivolous answers, as though in play. But before either of us quite noticed it, the heart of a sentimental woman grew heavy. If I die, how many times must you say it? For mercy's sake, that is enough. Please stop saying, if I die. It is ill-omened. If you die, I shall do anything just as you wish. And that should satisfy you, should it not? Sensei turned toward the garden and laughed. But after that, he said no more of the things his wife disliked to hear. As for me, the hour was growing long, and I, too, soon rose to go. Sensei and his wife came out as far as the entrance to see me off. Take good care of your sick father, said his wife. And until September, said Sensei, I made my bow and stepped out beyond the lattice door. Between the entrance and the gate, there stood a thick clump of sweet olive stretching its branches in the night as though to block my way. As I moved on 2 or 3 steps, I looked up at its darkened top, covered in dusky leaves, and thought of the flowers and fragrance of the coming autumn. For a long time already, in my own mind, I had remembered Sensei's house and that sweet olive tree together as things that could not be separated, when, by chance, I paused before that tree and let my thoughts go forward to the next autumn, when I should once more step across the entrance of this house. The electric light that had until then been shining through the lattice suddenly went out. It seemed that Sensei and his wife had at once gone inside. I alone went out into the dark street. I did not return at once to my lodging. There were purchases I had to make before going home, and there was also a need to give relief to my stomach filled with the feast I had eaten. So I merely walked toward the lively part of the town. The town was still in the early part of the evening, among men and women, drifting along in crowds as though they had nothing to do. I happened to meet one of those who had graduated with me that very day. He dragged me by force into a certain tavern. There I was made to listen to the flourish of his talk, frothing like the foam of beer. It was past midnight when I returned to my lodging. If you die, I shall do anything just as you wish, and that should satisfy you, should it not? Sensei turned toward the garden and laughed. But after that, he said no more of the things his wife disliked to hear. As for me, the hour was growing long, and I, too, soon rose to go. Sensei and his wife came out as far as the entrance to see me off. "Take good care of your sick father," said his wife. "And until September," said Sensei. I made my bow and stepped out beyond the lattice door. Between the entrance and the gate there stood a thick clump of sweet olive stretching its branches in the night as though to block my way. As I moved on 2 or 3 steps, I looked up at its darkened top, covered in dusky leaves, and thought of the flowers and fragrance of the coming autumn. For a long time already, in my own mind, I had remembered Sensei's house and that sweet olive tree together as things that could not be separated, when by chance I paused before that tree and let my thoughts go forward to the next autumn, when I should once more step across the entrance of this house. The electric light that had until then been shining through the lattice suddenly went out. It seemed that Sensei and his wife had at once gone inside. I alone went out into the dark street. I did not return at once to my lodging. There were purchases I had to make before going home, and there was also a need to give relief to my stomach filled with the feast I had eaten. So I merely walked toward the lively part of the town. The town was still in the early part of the evening, among men and women drifting along in crowds as though they had nothing to do, I happened to meet one of those who had graduated with me that very day. He dragged me by force into a certain tavern. There I was made to listen to the flourish of his talk, frothing like the foam of beer. It was past midnight when I returned to my lodging. Chapter 36. The next day as well, I went about in the heat, collecting the things I had been asked to buy. When I received the requests by letter, I had thought nothing of them. But when the moment came, they felt extremely troublesome. Wiping away sweat in the streetcar, I found myself resenting those country people who had not the slightest notion of feeling sorry for another person's time and trouble. I had no intention of letting this one summer slip by in idleness. Before returning home, I had already drawn up something like a schedule for my days there, and I had to obtain the books necessary to carry it out. I was prepared to spend half a day on the second floor of Maruzen, standing before the bookshelves in the section most closely related to my own concerns. I examined them one by one, from end to end. Of all my purchases, the one that troubled me most was a woman's Han-eri. If I asked a shop boy, he would bring me out as many as I liked, but when it came time actually to choose one, I could do nothing but hesitate. Moreover, the prices were extremely uncertain. When I asked the price, thinking it must be cheap, it turned out to be very expensive. And when, thinking it must be expensive, I refrained from asking it, would instead be surprisingly cheap. There were even some which, however long I compared them, gave me no clue at all as to where the difference in price could possibly come from. I was completely bewildered, and inwardly I regretted not having troubled Sensei's wife about it. I bought a bag. Naturally, it was no more than an inferior Japanese-made article, but even so, its metal fittings shone brightly enough to overawe people in the country. The buying of this bag had been my mother's request. She had written expressly in her letter that after graduating, I was to buy a new bag and return home with all the gifts packed inside it. When I read those words, I burst out laughing. It was not so much that I failed to understand my mother's way of thinking, as that the words themselves appealed to me as something faintly comic. Just as I had said, when taking leave of Sensei and his wife, I left Tokyo 3 days later by train and returned home. Though since winter, I had received various warnings from Sensei about my father's illness, and though I was the one who ought most to have been anxious, for some reason, it did not trouble me very deeply. Rather, I imagined my mother, after my father was no longer there, and felt sorry for her. That being so, it must be that somewhere in my heart I had already resigned myself to the thought that my father was a man destined to die. Even in the letter I wrote to my brother in Kyushu, I said that there was no hope at all of our father ever again becoming the healthy man he had once been. Once I even wrote that although his duties might make it difficult, if he could possibly arrange it, would it not be well for him to come home at least once, this summer, if only to show his face? I even used such sentimental expressions as that surely the two old people alone in the country must feel lonely, and that we too, as their children, were remiss beyond excuse. I had written, in truth, exactly as I felt at the time, and yet the feeling that remained in me after writing was not the same as the feeling with which I had written. I thought about that contradiction in the train, and as I went on thinking, I began to see myself as a shallow creature, changeable and light-minded even in my own eyes. The thought displeased me. Then again, I found myself thinking of Sensei and his wife, especially remembering the conversation they had had when I had been invited to dinner 2 or 3 days before. Which of us will die first? I repeated to myself, within my own mouth, the question that had arisen between Sensei and his wife that evening. And I thought that there was no one who could answer such a question with confidence. But if it were clearly known which one would die first, what would Sensei do? What would his wife do? It seemed to me that neither Sensei nor his wife could do anything but remain as they were now, just as I myself could do nothing, though my father, drawing nearer to death, waited in my home province. I felt how helpless human beings are. I felt how helpless is that native shallowness with which human beings are born that leaves them unable to do anything at all.